And our host today is Mark Olson, and our distinguished guest is Grant Cameron, who is also one of the founders of the group, along with Mark Olson. And our other co-host is Betty Holtman, who is also one of the founders, and her late husband. So if everybody's ready, Grant, Mark, if you want to start, and then Grant can go away and start talking.
There
Thank
you
you.
go.
Thanks, Mitzi. Mitzi's also a great help and has been from the last few years has been a tremendous addition to our group here. Tonight is a very unique and interesting night. We have probably one of the most decorated people, and probably one of the people that's been in the field of UFOs for probably most of his adult life, actually, now that I think about it. Charlie Red Sky is something he's really familiar, he's connected to. Grant Cameron, as Mitzi had mentioned, started this group, and which was started as sort of a self-help group and people who want to speak about UFOs, that sort of thing, and it's blossomed into a number of things. I know Grant's gone down a number of rabbit holes that we'll hear tonight. Grant's I was lucky enough to be at the UFO Congress in 2013 when he was awarded the International UFO Researcher of the Year. And he has been on many paths, and we look forward to listening to a lot of it tonight. Let's listen to a lot less of me and a lot more Grant. Grant, welcome to the show, and we're thrilled to have you here tonight with us.
Well, thanks for having me on, and thanks for your interest in what I'm doing, because I've been pretty busy doing a lot of research, less sort of lecturing and stuff like that, traveling to the States, because I always have my friends at Homeland Security who always give me a hard time. So I've given me more chance to do research, and I've had some health issues in the last year, which have sort of opened up things for me in terms of understanding maybe the bigger issues. As I've sort of put it now, I just thought about it today. I've had 4 near-death experiences without the circus. And I would like to sometime get the circus to get the actual, out-of-body experience or meet with, an angelic being or something like that. So I haven't had that, but I have sort of changed in terms of the way I see things, what may be more important in the issues. And to me, it always comes down to the experiencer, and I'll get into that. I maintain that we are in some ways wasting our time re-going over UFO sightings, government, when in fact the people with the answers are the experiencers. And there's a bunch of them in this room. There's a bunch of people who've had very clear, interesting experiences, and they are the ones that I've listened to. And I would think if I were to die tomorrow, I think I'd be pretty happy with the way that it has turned out, because basically what happened was in 1975, I had, as I've described it, I had the sighting the first night where the object flew right in front of the car. It was not a light in the sky. It was an object in front of the car. It was pretty close. And I sort of like went down the rabbit hole. The second night when I saw it, it was again, it came at me, and then it made this left-hand turn, and it sort of flew off into this slowly. It was like this is an object moving maybe 20, 30 miles an hour, very, very slow and very low to the ground. And I remember as it was flying away, I went, what's it doing? Like, why is it in Carmen, Manitoba? Carmen, Manitoba is in the middle of nowhere. And that was my whole thing from when I was 21 all the way through, is to try to figure out what was that thing I saw in Carmen? Like, what was this all about? Like, why was it here? What was it? And stuff like that. And I think if I were to die tomorrow, I'd be pretty content with the answers I've gotten in terms of what I've discovered. Although, if you've read my book on psychedelics, I had 25 high dose experiences where I decided I was going to try to get in the field, and I was going to go, and I was going to get the answer. And all they did time after time after time was hammer me for ego. about you think you know what's going on and you haven't got a clue, and you're so arrogant, and you got to get your ego in check. And it was just like it over and over and over again. It was the same thing. It was like you haven't got a clue. In fact, everything you know is exactly the opposite of what the answer is. And then finally I got frustrated at one point and I said, okay, so you tell me. All I want to know is what's going on here. I mean, you always hammering me for the ego, so you tell me what the hell's going on. And then whoever I was talking to said, we don't know either. And I went, what do you mean you don't know? Like, what do you mean? It's like, and I guess it was like they're from their level down. And it's like, I was just horrified. I said, what do you mean you don't know? We don't know either. I've sort of chased this thing, and I'm pretty content. And I've warned people that it's going to be a lot more spiritual than people think it is. In fact, I would say it fits in with all the spiritual experiences. I've seen the crossovers. When you start dealing with experiencers, and you start seeing these crossovers, and I'll get into it tonight in terms of one of the new books I've written. I'm going to talk first about disclosure, and then I'm going to talk about 3 books I've written. One was one of the more important books I've ever written, and that is a book on UFO sky pilots. And it involved a witness that both Mark and I knew, Pam Dupuis. She started in 2013. I had this enlightenment experience in 2012, where I was basically, I got the impression in my head that this has got to do with consciousness. I was watching a lecture by Colin Andrews. It came with absolute certainty. It was like an aha moment. It was like, oh, this is what this is all about. This is how this works. And so in 2013, the year after 2012, Pam Dupuis was given to me to talk to, and she's the one that claimed that she was flying the craft. And I was just horrified. I thought, I was going to throw her out of the house. I couldn't believe that this woman was actually bringing this stuff up. She told me about abductions, and she was remote viewing, and okay, whatever, but when this 70-year-old lady or whatever starts telling me she's flying the craft, I go, okay, that's too much of me. I mean, I've heard enough. I'm going to sit there and listen to this nonsense. And so then because all I could think about at that point was Saudi Arabian women at that point could not drive a car unless there was a man in the car. And I was thinking, like, they let you fly. I was thinking she's like a woman, a real sort of anti-women type thing, which I sort of regret. It was like, they let you fly the craft? They let a woman fly the craft? And she's so old. I mean, it's like, they let you fly the craft? She said, oh yeah, I've flown 3 different models. And I go, really? I said, how do you fly a craft? And she said, oh, you do it with your mind. And as soon as she said that, I realized why Stacy Wright had set me up with her, was because I was talking about consciousness, and she was saying consciousness is what this is all about. That's how you fly the craft. And she said, I went, oh, it's like, and then these people started to appear to me almost like synchronistically. They started appearing in my path, all these people who had flown the craft. And if you go on the internet, there's really not much on people flying the craft, but I had 36 plus witnesses. And as Gary Nolan expressed, Gary Nolan is one of the scientists who's one of the big names in the UFO community now. He's a geneticist at Stanford University, and he said, one case is anecdotal. So if you're talking about people, one case is anecdotal, 2 is evidence. And I say 36 people, you better start looking at it, because that's a lot of people who are telling this bizarre story that makes no sense at all. So if you're going to make up a story about, being abducted on a UFO, the last thing you want to say is, oh, I was flying the craft. Let me fly the craft. I flew it to another planet. And it's like, yeah, sure you did. It's like that's not something you're going to make up. And there's a bunch of other stuff that came with it that didn't make any sense at all either. So I'll talk about that. And I'm going to talk about a book about ports, and my phone call today from Uri Geller, which I got this afternoon. I'll talk a little bit about that. And the third book was a book that I did on different articles on the various presidents, who was briefed. I talk about where I was brought in to provide information to brief Donald Trump and stuff like that. So that's a book that was called The Ride. And that was one of the more important things that I suggest people look at. It's by Bill Hicks. And if you look it up, called Bill Hicks, The Ride. Put it in a Google search, and it's a video. Watch it. It's 2 minutes long, and it is absolutely, when I heard this video, I said, this guy must have been abducted. This guy knows exactly. And that is what I would say would sum up what this is all about. It's a 2-minute comedy session. He was considered to be the fourth most best comedian in the world. He died very young of pancreatic cancer very quickly. He's very young when he died, but that sums up what this is all about. It's called The Ride. So I called the book The Ride, and he talks about you go up and down and round, and the ride is so real. It's so amazing. You think it's actually real. And there's people on the ride that have been on the ride many times, and they say, you know what? I think this is just a ride. And we kill those people because people got invested. Don't tell me. What do you mean? We got a lot invested in this ride. Shut that guy up. I mean, what do you mean? It's just a ride. And so watch this video. It's very, that's why I named the book The Ride. And that's what, to me, it was a ride for me that, taught me a lot of things, and a lot of things that I just wanted to go where the answers were. I had no vested interest. I wasn't trying to make money from it. I didn't have any political thing. I didn't have any scientific thing I wanted to prove that to back up stuff that I had learned at university or whatever. I just wanted to know what was going on. But let's start with disclosure, because a lot of people are into disclosure. They're into this idea that the government now has a plan that they're going to disclose. And you've got to realize, I think, first of all, because I'm a little less optimistic about the situation than other people are, because what you got to realize is how the U.S. government works. The U.S. government isn't like Canada, where the prime minister basically calls the shots. He controls all the committees. He controls all the money. He controls everything, and he can do, if you can get these one person convinced. In the United States, you have the three levels of government. So you have and in the one level of government, in the Congress, you have the House of Representatives and the Senate, and everybody's fighting. Everybody's at odds with each other. And so I wouldn't hold my breath that this is all going to unravel, because what you have to realize is there's competing people working against each other, and that I don't think the UFO situation is very high on the list of things that the House wants to do. It may have gone through the Senate, it may have gone through the House, but people have to realize that every time a session ends in the Congress and the Senate, every time they have an election, everything gets thrown out. It starts all over again, and the other party makes up new policies. So just because it was passed in the last session of Congress doesn't mean the new Congress is going to continue it. The one thing I would sort of warn people about is to realize, people always talk about the Illuminati, who's actually running this. And I say it's actually the big money, the big business. It's the people behind, the people who are funding the campaign. So people used to complain to me. They'd say, Hillary Clinton won't answer the question about UFO. I said, she absolutely will. If you go to one of her sessions where she's charging $35,000 a plate for some dinner or something, or as Paul Davids did, he went to a breakfast that she was hosting and with his wife and paid $1,000 a plate for a breakfast. If you do that and walk up to her, she'll answer your question. But if you're not contributing, why would she answer your question when someone gives her $100,000 or $1 million? I mean, that guy wants something done, she's going to do it. She's going to answer his questions or whatever. It's whoever's funding the campaigns. And what you got to realize is that all the various aerospace companies, so if there was a cover-up, the government doesn't do UFOs. People have to realize that the government is not in charge of UFOs. The government is in charge of running the whole situation, and half of everything in the U.S. government is contracted out. That's half all the military, all the all sorts of stuff is contracted out, because it's very easy to do. It's you put it out, and a contractor will deal with the salary. You don't have to worry about people, unions and all this kind of stuff. You just put it out, and that contractor will deal with it. So one of the things that you'll see was raised as an issue in the problem with this is, and Lou Elizondo brings this up, and what I say to people is, when you're listening to Lou Elizondo and Mellon and all these people, you don't have to agree with what these people are saying, but listen very closely to what they're saying. And because from time to time, something will slip. And one of the things he said as a problem is, he said, one of the problems may be, and he always uses this thing, maybe, he doesn't, not saying it for sure. It's sort of like he's saying it for sure, but he's just covering himself. Maybe that the parts were given to certain contractors and they weren't given to other contractors, and that may ensue a lawsuit. So if the rumor is always that Lockheed Skunk Works got the back engineering. So if it suddenly gets disclosed that there's all this technology and it's all controlled by Lockheed Skunk Works, well, what's Boeing going to do? Boeing's going to say, we're suing. You gave it to them. You gave all the stuff. You didn't give anything to us. And those are the kind of problems that people have to realize behind the scenes is that, then Elizondo brings it up, that some people may have gotten stuff where it should be spread across the board, and that somebody, because of political favors or whatever, was given it, or because they had an expertise or whatever. And so you have to look at these issues behind the curtain. For example, in 1990, we chased around the former chairman of the board of the Institute for Defense Analysis, who was the former president of Penn State University for 15 years. He had 14 honorary doctorate degrees. He was on the Defense Science Board. He was in the Institute for Defense Analysis is where DARPA came from. That's where the JSONs came from. He was there. He was on the chairman of the board of the Institute. They created all these things. He was very, very well known. He was friends with President Eisenhower, had done engineering studies for Eisenhower. And we knew that he knew what was going on, and he would talk in rhymes and riddles. He's the type of guy who couldn't sort of hang up the phone. So he would sort of talk around the issues. And at one point he cut us off and he said, let me ask you a question. He said, you're just curious, aren't you? Admit it. You're just curious. Why should we change the rules to satisfy your curiosity? And supposedly Bush was told that, Bush told Jimmy Carter that. Curiosity is not a sufficient need to know. So what you have to realize is that the people who are controlling the situation, whoever they are, whatever black ops program that's running this, and there may be, because if you listen to Stephen Greer, he seems pretty sure. He says he's got 1,100 witnesses that he's putting in front of Congress. So if there's a black ops that has back engineered some of this stuff, the thing is, why would they release it to you? People think, well, you know, they should release where they're working on it, who's working on it, bring out these witnesses to testify. What you got to realize is the minute somebody testifies, the Russians go, oh, we know that guy. Get that guy contact. You immediately know who he's working for, and you know where the program is. So if the Russians know where the program is, then they send the spies into wherever the program is, and they infiltrate the programs if you know the names of the people who are working on the program and you know where the programs are working. So don't hold your breath that they're ever going to release publicly. They may do it in front of the Congress, in front of what they call the 8. There's 8 congressmen and senators who are sort of read in on all the top secret programs. So they may know what's going on, but they're not going to release it because it's all going to be national security. We can't say, because if we identify who the people working on it are, we're going to tell the Russians exactly how far we've gotten and what these people, because they're going to go look at these people's papers, what papers have these guys written, and you got to realize all the stuff going on in the background. And they really, the basic bottom line is they really don't care if you want to know. They simply don't care. You don't have a need to know. You aren't eligible to do it because you're not contributing. If you were to contribute to the program, if you had something that we needed, they would bring you in. And if you look back, there was a guy by the name of Admiral Wilson who was briefed. And basically, he was the head of intelligence for the Joint Chiefs of Staff. So the five top military guys, he was head of intelligence for them. And he suddenly found out through Eric Davis that they had a program. And so he went looking for it because it was under him. One of the programs that was identified was under him. And he said, this program's under me and I don't know what's going on. And he went and he managed to get a hold of a lawyer working on the program. And they said, sorry, General, you do not have a need to know, and hung up the phone on him. And he was furious and he started to push and he got the word back. You keep pushing this thing and you're going to lose a star and you're going to get demoted. And he wanted to be the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency. And so he shut up and he stopped talking about it. He stopped pushing to get it, because that's what they do. They will use your, it's like the joke is, what does a 1-star general think about all day? Thinks about being a 2-star general. And so, I mean, if you got that, you're not going to open your mouth because they have things they want to contribute. So the disclosure program, I say 2 things. Number one, if Greer's right, and Greer says that they have back engineered some stuff, so I have to give him credibility, because a lot of the things that Greer said in the early days, people always conflict Greer with his personality. Greer is a very difficult person to deal with. He's got this very, as most people do, who are very high end in any program. For example, he always said that, like psychotics, if you see the surgeons, CEOs of companies. A lot of these people and CEOs of companies, and I know that happened with me at the university, is these jobs that a lot of people really don't want to do. And the guys that are really ambitious that think they know everything get to the top because they just push harder than everybody else to get to the top. They want to be the president. They want to be whatever the job is, and they have big egos, and they need egos to get through it. So if you're going to run for president of the United States, you better have a pretty big ego because you're going to take a lot of shots on the way in. And that's the whole issue, is that because they have this sort of ego, they're hard to deal with. So Stephen Greer may be hard to deal with, but the stuff that I checked on him early on, because I've been watching him because I had the president's UFO site, and I knew that he was trying to brief the Clintons and Bill Clinton, and he was he was talking to different people inside the Clinton administration. So I knew that he had talked to Woolsey. I knew that he had talked to the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency. I know he had talked to this J2, the head of intelligence, Joint Chiefs of Staff. And that all turned out to be true. Everybody said, Greer, he's lying. He's full of it and all this sort of stuff. And they were conflicting with the fact is just because the guy's very hard to deal with and he's got a big ego doesn't mean he's lying. You got to differentiate between so that's what I say is when you listen to these top people, they may have a lot of things. It's like the Bible says, all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. Everybody's got some problems. Everybody's got some skeletons. If you start to dig, they've got skeletons. So don't conflict with the skeleton with what they know. You listen to these guys very closely. From time to time, these guys will release something and you go, hey, what's this all about? I'll give you an example. Jim Semivan is the guy that I believe was called the big man. I was talking to Chris Bledsoe when the disclosure thing was going on. So the disclosure thing really sort of took off in December of 2017 when the New York Times did the article. They did that based upon material that was being fed to Tom DeLonge and a group of people that were working with Tom DeLonge from the government. That happened, and they announced that the To the Stars Academy was announced October the 11th in 2017, a couple months before the New York Times article. So they came forward, but I knew already they were going to do this. I knew that Hillary Clinton was going to be the disclosure president, that they were going to drop this thing. And Chris Bledsoe was telling me his book is about to be released. He's a very sort of famous contactee now. Yeah, I'll maybe skip it. If somebody has a question, I'll get into it. But Chris Bledsoe is a friend of mine, and he's the government has watched everything that he's done. He's had all these high-level people talking to him. And he was telling me back in 2015 and 2016, he said, they're going to do disclosure. He said, they're going to drop it. The big man he called him the big man. And I'm pretty sure he was referring to Jim Semivan, who's actually a little man. He's not very tall. And he called him the big man. The big man's going to go in 60 Minutes. He said all sorts of high-level people, high-level officials are going to come forward and they're going to say UFOs exist and they're going to disclose this thing. They're going to drop it. That was in 2015, 2016. And that's exactly what happened. So Jim Semivan came forward. Tom Elizondo came forward. Mellon came forward. Justice came forward. They had all these people that came forward and said UFOs exist and we're going to push it. Now, Jim Semivan had said in one of his interviews, he said, I went to the government and he said, I told them, we're going to drop it. We're going to drop this thing. And it's exactly what Chris Bledsoe told me. He said, we're going to drop it. And he said they went to all the high level, the CIA, because he was one of the top guys. He was the equivalent of a 2-star general inside the CIA, Jim Semivan. So Jim Semivan had gone to all these people after he retired. And that's the key, is these guys all retire. So then they don't have the problem with, we're going to take your stars away, we're going to demote you, all that kind of stuff. They're all retired. So Jim Semivan had retired. And at that point, he could talk to Chris Bledsoe. And one of the first things he did, he went and talked to Chris Bledsoe because he's an experiencer as well. He had an experience in the early 1990s where the beings were inside his room. So he went and he said, I went to the head of the 3-letter agencies and I said, you guys, you can't get it out. We're going to do it. You guys had your chance. You can't get it out. We're going to drop it. We're not going to release classified material, but we are going to move this thing into the public. And that's exactly what happened. On October the 4th, the week before Elizondo, or the day Elizondo retired, they had a meeting in Washington and Hal Puthoff was there. Jim Semivan was there. Who else was there? There was a contractor. It may have been Bigelow. There was people. And in the morning, Elizondo retired. In the afternoon, they had this meeting with Elizondo and they started to drop this thing. This is the plan. Elizondo's coming forward and we're going to disclose this thing. We're going to identify ATIP as being one of the programs that was being run and all this kind of stuff. And so Jim Semivan also was abducted, and that's how it fits in. So Jim Semivan, he said it was an abduction. He said, I had the encounter. I remember them being in the room. I wasn't afraid. And I think there was a thing that he was standing on the front lawn and they were flying away. Him and his wife were standing there. And at one point he says, you know, the guy asked him, he said, what about telepathy? Was there any telepathy involved? And Jim Semivan said, yeah, in fact, there was this really weird thing that happened. He said, I was standing there with my wife and there was this entity standing behind me and it had this guardian type thing going on. And as soon as he said that, I said, oh my God, that's Michael Newton. That's Michael Newton. And I went and I found the book, and sure enough, Michael Newton describes that when you die, according to the 7,000 witnesses that he regressed, you go and you have family members that come and take you across, and then you go through the tunnel, and then the light is there, and then you have this, before you go back to your soul group, you have this thing which they call the life review. So you go in front of between 3 and 12 beings who are wearing white robes. You can't see their faces. They're sort of black. They're sort of not visible. They have these medals around them, and this is where I'm saying how it ties into the spiritual thing. They have these medals, and in the middle is a symbol that means something just to you. All the symbols are different, and they have this alien writing. And all 7,000 people are describing these medals that these beings 3 to 12, and they say they stand there, and it's sort of like there seems to be like a courtroom, and their spirit guide stands behind them on the left-hand side. So as soon as I heard that, I said to the guy who did the interview, I said, hey, can you ask Jim Semivan which side was the entity standing on? Because when you get to if you read the Alien Sky Pilot book, 36 witnesses, a bunch of them. I'll give you the one. The one was a retired U.S. Air Force colonel who had also flown the craft. So it's not, a 70-year-old lady. Now we've got the guy who said, he said, I flew planes. I said, what kind of planes you fly? My father was a pilot. My son's a pilot. What kind of planes you fly? And he's naming these planes, and he said, F-16. I said, you flew X-16s? He said, yeah. And then and I said, sit down and tell me your story. He said, I think it seemed like a dream. I said, okay, sit down and tell me your dream. And he told me the same story everybody else was telling me. He said, I'm in the craft. I appear in the craft. I'm in the craft, and I'm standing there, and there's people standing behind me. He said, I don't know whether they're human or whether they're entities. So the same thing. Why are they standing? Is the same thing as Jim Semivan. He thought it was an entity. He thought it was an entity. And this retired UFO colonel said the same thing. And he said, they're standing behind me. I can't see them. And then I'm standing there, and then they say, go ahead and do it. And then he says, I don't know what to do. And they said, you know what to do. Just do it. And then he looks, and there's this panel, and he goes and puts his hands on the panel. And then what every single witness says, the same thing. He said, I became one with the craft. This is the number one message of the whole UFO thing is oneness. Put my hand on the thing. I became one with the craft. Whatever I thought is what the craft thought. I became the craft. The craft became me. This oneness thing, it became one. The craft is alive. And I was interacting with the craft, and whatever I think is what the craft does. And what the entities say to you is they say, okay, where do you want to go? And the one guy said, I'd like to see the Milky Way from a distance. And they said, okay, hang on. This will take 1 second. And it's going to be very intense G-force. And he said in 1 second, he looked out the window, and there was the Milky Way off in a distance. So that's 50 to 70,000 light years in 1 second, which I say, if that's true, if he went that far in 1 second, we got something wrong with the ideas of time and space. We got something wrong here, because either he's telling, and this guy's telling the truth. He's a big time Mormon. And so that's the thing where these people are describing these beings behind them. And Newton describes this fact that the soul guide. So that was the whole idea. And that's what Jim Semivan said. There was an entity, and it had this guardian type thing going on. And as soon as he started, I went, whoa, it's like the crossover between the UFO experience and the spiritual experience. I'll give you another one. People who are on the craft will always not off like now, if I were to go back and interview them, I'd get all the people probably to tell this story. But at the time, I was just letting them tell their story, and they would leave this thing out. The one thing that they would say, I had a guy from Liverpool, and he talked about the fact that he went on and he was told to put his hand on a panel that was on the wall. All these other people were flying the craft. And he said, can I have a go at it? And they said, yeah, sure, you can have a go at it. And he put his hand on the panel. He said, as soon as he put his hand on the panel, he became one with the craft. The craft was alive, and he could see in 360 degrees. As soon as I hear that, and that's another thing. If you're on the ship and you're going to make up a story, Why would you make up the story that you could see on 360 degrees? That's totally stupid. That doesn't make any sense. Why would you make a stupid story like that? But if you look at out of body experience people and you have out of body experience, the first thing they say is you can see in 360 degrees. So the out of body experience is the same as the abduction experience. And then you start to wonder, is this actually what's actually going on? Because how many people have ever seen anybody being abducted? There's one case that Bud Hopkins talks about on the 25th floor of a New York building where somebody said they saw someone being taken out the window into a craft. Other than that, I've never seen a case where anybody saw anybody being abducted. So what's really going on? There's an event going on, but as we go along more and more, the more you look at it, the more it looks like they can actually reproduce anything they want. And the idea that this may be much more spiritual than people think it is, because you have these beings standing behind you. You can see under 360 degrees. And the one that blew me away is one of the things that the sky pilot people would tell you. And that's the thing. Once you start talking to the people who've been on the craft, forget about the UFO sightings, forget about what the government's doing. Who cares what the government's doing? Go and talk to the people who are on the craft and ask them what actually happened and stuff. And you start to learn these really weird things. And the one was that people will say, I went on the craft, and I don't know if have you done Terry Lovelace? Have you interviewed Terry Lovelace?
No,
oh, wow. You got to do Terry Lovelace. Okay, so he's a lawyer out of southern United States. And Terry Lovelace said, I went in the craft, and he said the outside of the craft was, like fairly big, but not all that big. He said, I went inside the craft, and it was the size of a football stadium inside. And then there was one case that was told by Len Stringfield. I started stringing these together. Now, the thing was, I didn't ask the people when I interviewed them. So they all may have said the same thing, but I forgot to ask the question. But a number of them did say this. Chris Bledsoe said the craft was about 30 feet on the outside. He looked at it. He went in, looked inside the craft. And it was huge on the inside. And then he went outside. He looked outside the craft, and he looked inside the craft. And Hal Puthoff said the same thing. Hal Puthoff said he's the sort of the top scientist that's sort of been involved in black programs and sort of knows what the government may know. And he said, the one thing I'd really like to figure out is how can the craft be bigger on the inside than it is outside? Again, if it's bigger on the inside than it is on the outside of the craft, there's something wrong. We've got an anomaly here. We've got something that tells us, hey, maybe your science isn't as right. It's what they were telling me. You think that in the psychedelic experience, you think you know everything. You haven't got a clue, buddy. When you hear these stories about the craft being bigger on the inside, that's the whole thing. You start realizing like, wow, we may not know anything about what's going on here. So the other case that was told, and I heard I heard it, and then I saw the case. I saw a case, one that was that even when the craft is on the ground, when they recover a craft on the ground, that it's actually bigger on the inside than it is outside when it's on the ground. And there was a guy that was a photographer, and this is 1973, was actually told the story. He was flown out of Hawaii. He was a photographer, and he was flown to Norton Air Force Base in California. Then he was driven 2 hours to a hangar in the middle of nowhere. And inside this hangar, there was a crane that had a netting, and inside the netting was a flying saucer. And his job was to film the panels. Like people would describe, put your hands on these panels, and the panels would have these different colors and symbols on them and stuff like that. And sometimes the being would just put his hand above the panel. He wouldn't even touch the panel. He just put his hand above the panel, and something would happen. So his job was to photograph these panels inside the craft. And he said that when he went inside the craft, and Chris Bledsoe, in the book, I actually have Chris Bledsoe actually draws a panel. I get him to draw a panel, and he's got the symbols that he saw on the panel. And he named the colors, but he didn't put it on the drawing. But in this 1973 example where the photographer, and again, this is a case out of nowhere. It's just a case that the guy talked, and it's the same thing. It says he went inside the craft, and he said he could have taken a football, thrown it in any direction, and not hit a wall. And the craft was only like 30 feet across inside this netting. And that's what is so bizarre, is that where our understanding of science is physical, everything's measurable and all this kind of stuff. And what it's showing us is that this is totally nonsense, and it has this spiritual implications. So the guy that told me that he had gone 1 second and he had seen the Milky Way from a distance also said that his being was by the name of Elby. One of the patterns that you'll find with UFOs is that people always have one being that they deal with. Usually there may be some exceptions, but usually it's one being. And that again gets into is this a spirit guide? Is like he's playing an alien, but he's a spirit guide, because you have a spirit guide. And the thing was, everybody will always describe there's one being. So his being, he interacted with 5 different races, but the one being always talked to him, and the being was named LB. And so LB took him, he said, into the spirit world 3 times. The first time it was to a lower level. It was like a darkness sort of level where it wasn't like hell or anything, but there was really nothing happening. It was sort of dark and he could feel the depth, that it was not a very high level. The second time he was taken, and his mother had died, and he was in the spirit world with his mother, and he couldn't see his mother, but he could talk to his mother, and his mother was talking to him in the spirit world. The third time LB took him to the spirit world, he took him, and again, you're looking at, like, you're not anymore taking him to a flying saucer, they're taking him to the spirit world. So he's taken to the spirit world, he's with his mother, he can see his mother, and he's walking around in this field with green pastures and stuff like this, and he's very religious, which comes to the idea that your experience reflects your personality. So he's very heavy Mormon guy, still strictly Mormon. And he said the mother showed him a building that looked like a temple in Nephi, Utah, a Mormon temple in Nephi, was a small one. So he said there's a small building, and the building could open up visually. You could see inside the building. And he said, his mother said, when you die, Ron, you'll get a room inside this building. And he could see the thing opened up, and he could see your father's got a room there, and it opened up, and he could see his father inside this room, inside the building. And then that would close up, and then his mother showed his room, and then he was going in the building, and he went in the building, and he said, I walked in that building, and he said it was like 10 or 100 times the size inside as it was outside. And I said, hey, that's what Chris Bledsoe said about the craft. And I'm going, is this a temple, or is this a flying saucer? Or because he's an experiencer, he's had experiences for the last 50 years. He wrote up a book, it's like 600 pages. He still hasn't published it. I keep saying, Ron, come on. And I think you guys interviewed him. I said, come on, Ron, it's like you've got 12% of your heart. Let's get this thing done. And but now he's posting a lot of his photographs and stuff and telling some of the stories. But that was his story. And as soon as I heard that, I said, whoa, that's a crossover from the spirit world to the UFO thing, that they both are describing this fact that something is bigger on the inside than it is outside. And the other story he told me, he said, went in the room, and there was all his mother, they had sort of like these paintings on the wall of his mother's life and all the things she'd done and stuff like that. And then he said she took him to the other end of the building, and there was a table there, and there was on the table, there was these crystals. And as soon as I heard crystals, I go, oh, if you go back to 1988, there was a documentary called UFO Cover Up Live, and it's on the internet. You can watch it. And in there, there's a guy who claims to be, know what's going on. And he says, the most amazing thing that the aliens showed us was a crystal. And they could turn the crystal, and you could see the history of the world. And I think Linda Howe told the story that she had been told that they could take the crystal, and you could see the crucifixion of Jesus Christ in this crystal, and that the aliens were showing people this crystal. They were showing the government this crystal. So as soon as I heard that, I go, oh, that's that story from UFO Cover Up Live. And it's also the story from Michael Newton. When Michael Newton says, when you go to the life between your lives, you study your next life, and you study what you didn't do in this life and what you're going to do in the next life. And that's the whole deal. You're running your life. It's not like you can blame your mother-in-law, blame God, blame the government, blame the Illuminati or whatever. No, they go, time out. This is about you. Forget about them. They live their life. They'll stand, judgment of what they did or whatever. This is about you. What did you do? And people always, Newton said, everybody always said the same thing. All 7,000 people all said the same thing when they were asked, how did it work out? They all said, I could have done better. And it was like, oh, I forgot to do this, and I was going to do that, and all this kind of stuff. And next time I'm going to do it. I'm going to go and do this kind of stuff. And Newton talked about the crystals. So he would talk about being in these big, huge, and again, it's all things I think that you make up in your mind. They'd be in these big, huge libraries, and they would open this book, this big, giant book, and inside the book would be a crystal. And they would look at the crystal at a certain angle, and they could see their past life and their future life, and they would plan their next life. And so here you have crystal, and it's all tying together with the spiritual world and the UFO world. And you start to get this overlap, and you wonder which is which. Is the spiritual world the UFO world? Is the UFO world the spiritual world? And what I think it comes down to is what I sort of came to the conclusion based upon all the stuff I'd seen, is you got to get your priorities right. You got to understand. It's like someone described the other day, said, you cannot go to the moon if you believe the world is flat and we're at the center of the universe and the sun goes around the earth. You have to understand, you got to get these levels. And until you get that, so as we go along the levels, and we've got a bunch of levels that are wrong. And one of the main things we have, and I'm writing a book called The Evil Alien. I'm going to deal with the concept of the evil alien and all this stuff about, is there evil and what's actually going on and who are the aliens and stuff like that. And in that book, I look at this idea that I had a second download experience. It happened in Winnipeg. I was walking down the street. This would be 2017. And I got almost like the psychedelic, same sort of thing with the psychedelic thing, where I got one thing. It said, you think this is right? No, it's this. If you think this is right, no, it's actually this. It's the opposite. And the one was, if the world is, say, one life, then that's one world with certain rules and regulations. But if it's multiple lives, everything changes. All the rules will change. And then the key one was, if the world's made out of little nuts and bolts, then that's one world with certain rules and regulations. But if the world is made out of consciousness, then it's a completely different world and everything changes. That's what they were telling me. They said, not only is what you got wrong, it's exactly the opposite of what you think it is. And the idea of consciousness, so that gets to the idea of how does the world actually start, this idea of God. So what I say now, and this is just my opinion, God did not create the heaven and the earth. God created the sparks of the divine. And we're the ones that create the heaven and the earth. We are creating it because it's all made out of consciousness. So that's the thing. You go into your life, you plan your certain things, you build it. And Mark Olson builds buildings all over the place and makes things elaborate and more grand and tells stories. And those stories pass on and the world gets bigger and more intelligent. And that's how the world elaborates. We start from very simple and we build bigger stories and bigger stories. And anything you can imagine, you can create. So people are imagining things and they're thinking of this. And God's like watching the movie. It's like Shakespeare said, I hated Shakespeare with a passion. And now I love the one line from Shakespeare. I still hate Shakespeare, but I love the one line. All the world's a stage. All the men and women are but actors. They have their entrances and they have their exits, and each man plays many roles. And that's the whole deal. We come on here and I say, okay, Mark and I have a meeting before we're born. And we say, we're going to start this group in Winnipeg. And Mark, you're going to do this. I'm going to do this. And we have this meeting and we say, okay, we're going to do this. And we come on to the stage and then we leave the stage. And I'm being interviewed by Whitley Strieber in another couple of days. And Whitley's got a message from his wife. If you know, Whitley Strieber wrote a book about his dead wife that he wrote with his dead wife. And she came to him and said, Whitley, I am no longer Anne, but I'll always be Anne to you. And I'm not sure if Whitley's got the same impression I've got of what happened. So what Anne is saying is, Whitley, I played on the stage with you as Anne, and I'll always be Anne. But I've gone on. I'm somebody else now. I'm in a new life or whatever, but I'll always be Anne to you because we played this thing. So we played these roles. We go on and we go off the role, and then we say, oh, I think I'll do better. And then you get these really bizarre things, what I call the Judas dilemma. What happened to Judas? If it hadn't been for Judas being selling Jesus for 30 pieces of silver, there would have been no crucifixion. And what would have happened then? It's sort of like you needed Judas. And so there's a story that's told, and this gets into the Newton thing. This gets really weird as to the play. Is the story's told, the guy standing at a bus stop, and all these people are going back into earth. They've worked in between lives and they're going back into the earth. And the guy says, the last time, he said, I worked on forgiveness. I got level 2 forgiveness. And this time I'm going to get level 9 of forgiveness. And all the other people waiting for go back the bus to pick them and take them up and back to the earth say, oh, that's great, man. Fantastic. I hope you make it, man. And whatever. And he said, yeah, he says, what I'm going to do is, he said, I'm going to have 3 kids and I'm going to have a wife. And then I'm going to be driving down the road and I'm going to get hit by a school bus, and my wife and my 3 kids are going to get killed, and I'm going to be paralyzed for my entire life. And at the end of my life, I'm going to forgive the guy. And they went, oh, fantastic, man. Oh, just, man, if you could do that, man, that would be the absolute top of forgiveness. And then the guy said, part of the rule is that the bus ain't coming until one of you volunteers to drive the school bus. And then they go, no, we're not driving the school bus. And that's this whole idea. It starts to get very complex as to, coming back, playing these roles in terms of who's doing what. But the thing is, we're creating it. Now, if you go back to how quantum physics actually started, you see that all the guys from quantum physics, whether it was Niels Bohr, whether it was Max Planck, Heisenberg, von Neumann, all these guys that created the atomic bomb, that started quantum physics, and they all had this idea, this idea of non-locality, that a particle, matter does not appear. Matter is a quantum wave form. Quantum wave form is neither matter or consciousness. It's sort of in between, or it's not a wave. It's a wave and a particle at the same time. And when it's observed, then it turns into a particle. And that's the whole concept, that consciousness is creating the physical universe. There is no matter until there's an observer. And that's the whole idea, that we're creating the universe. So we're creating this thing, and it starts with little particles, and we get these ideas, and it gets more complex as we go on. So when I looked at all these different things, I started to realize that is the number one message. The number one message is oneness, but the one message is the idea that it's all connected, that it's all one thing. And that there is no really time and space. We're creating it. It's all created. It's like this visual holographic universe that we're creating it, and we're developing this world. So and that's what the quantum physics people were saying, and that's what the UFO people are being told. That's exactly what they're being told. Even the thing where, if you remember the story where the guy who was head of Lockheed Skunk Works, he gave a lecture and he said, "We've now got the technology to take ET home. We've discovered the mistake in the equation." And Jan Hartson, who was a big engineer at the time, and he was giving a lecture to the alumni at UCLA. Jan Hartson had an experience when he's 9 years old, and you start to wonder, is this chance that he had this experience at 9 years old? And then he meets Ben Rich at 9 years old. Him and his brother, they wanted to build a flying saucer because they had this UFO like 30 feet away in the backyard, this flying saucer. And he went to Ben Rich and he said, "Ben, I've been fascinated my whole life. I became an electrical engineer so I could build a flying saucer. I need to know, how did they get here? How does it work?" And Ben Rich turns around, he said exactly what this Dr. Eric Walker that we had talked to and from Penn State University had said. He said, "Let me ask you a question. What do you know about ESP?" And John Hartson said, "Means everything in time and space is connected." And he said, "That's how it works." And he walked away. Tom DeLonge was told consciousness. When Tom DeLonge brought up consciousness, he said the head of Lockheed Skunk Works, the head scientist, that's all he wanted to talk about was consciousness. So this is the whole idea that consciousness is primary. And until we get that right, until we realize that consciousness creates matter, we're not going to go anywhere, because we're sort of building a puzzle with pieces from another puzzle, and we've got it all mixed up. So consciousness is absolutely primary to the whole thing, to how it's built. And unless we realize that, we're going to always assume that consciousness is created by the brain. So if you go into the near-death experience thing, and a lot of people, one of the people who flew the sky pilot, there's two of them. Preston Dennett, I didn't know had flown the craft. I've now heard he's flown the craft. Preston Dennett is one that if you haven't had him on, you got to get Preston Dennett on. He's written about 30 books. Very, very knowledgeable guy. Wrote a whole book on UFOs over schools. He's got some really interesting books, or over movie theaters, or what do they call them? The drive-ins. But Preston Dennett and the head of MUFON for Japan both claim that they can at will do out-of-body experience. They're very proficient at it. They both did meditation, and they can do it. And again, they describe the fact that it's a conscious experience being on the ship, that they can actually go. The guy from Japan had done 22 sessions. He'd gone on board the ship, and he had he talked to the Greys, and he would describe the technology. So people say, "Oh, we got all this technology." And I say, "Well, maybe we do, but hang on, you got to hear what some of the stuff that they describe." And what he describes was, he was on board the ship and he wanted an answer to something. And he said the wall was all white. And he said the alien, the Gray, put out his hand like this, out like this. and this book just came out of the wall. And he opened the book. It just came out of the wall. And and he asked him, and he said, we can make the ship as big as we want. And what did Pam Dupuy tell us, Mark? She said they have ships that are as big as the solar system. And this is the whole thing, that if you start looking at this, the complexity of how complex this thing may be, it may be that you're walking down the road and there's a rock on the side of the road. And inside that rock is a civilization. It could be just a UFO that's made of rock, and inside there, because there's no time and space. So you can have a 30-foot craft that when you go inside, it's the size of the solar system. And it's got all these different things, and they live in there and all this. It just changes the whole perspective when you start this consciousness thing. But everybody always wants to assume that consciousness. So in the out-of-body experience, what I say is to understand this concept. There's a painting that's actually been done where you see the woman is coming out of the body, and she's floating up, and she's looking back at her body. Okay, so people assume that consciousness is in the brain, that we're seeing stuff in the brain. So that there's actually a football game. People believe there's actually a football game going on inside the brain, and these little football players are playing, stuff like that. And that Elvis Presley is still alive and he's inside the radio and this sort of thing, that it's all happening inside the brain. That's where consciousness is coming from. So you have the out-of-body experience where the person floats out and looks back at their body, which Chris Bledsoe described, which a lot of UFO experiences have described, is that they're out of their body and they're looking back at their body. Or Betty Andreasson, they wrote 6 books on Betty Andreasson, had her first experience in 1946. And she talks about being brought back in a glass orb, which is exactly what Chris Bledsoe described. Dropped off in the backyard. She said, I was so happy to be home. And there was the trailer, and I ran into the trailer, and I was so happy to be back after this experience of going to all these different beings and worlds and stuff like that. And she said, I went, my husband was still sleeping, and I went into the bedroom and I looked, and I was sitting on the side of the bed. And so I went inside my body and I went back in. So the thing is, if you're looking at your body, say she's looking back at her body and she's sitting on the side of the bed, is the consciousness in the brain? No, it's not. The consciousness is right there. You're looking at the body. I'm the consciousness. I'm looking at my body sitting on the side of the bed. So where is the brain? It's inside the consciousness. Everything's inside the consciousness. And when you start listening to what people are saying, for example, Stephen Greer, when he does the meditation for the CE5, he quotes the Sufi expression, you see yourself as a puny form when within you, the entire universe is enfolded. That's where it really gets weird. That's where I think it's heading. It's heading into this idea that it's all within. That's what a lot of the people who flew the ship, the beings would say to them, Chris Bledsoe, Ron Johnson said, I was there, and then they said, hey, where do you want to go? I want to see the Milky Way from a distance. And they said, okay, it's going to take 1 second. You have to imagine it. It's within you. You've got to imagine it. And everybody was told the same thing. It's inside you. Imagine it. It's not going to happen unless you imagine it. And he imagined it, and boom, it happened. And that's the whole idea, like remote viewing. Where are you going when you're remote viewing? You're not floating out to a target. You're actually going inside your head where everything is, and the person is instantly at the target. As soon as you tell them the number, they say, oh, okay, I'm over at the target. And it's the idea that it's all within you. Rumi said the same thing. So did Jesus. Jesus said, you look here, you look there. It is not there. The kingdom of God is within you. And you start looking at all this stuff and you go, holy cow. A lot of these people from ancient Buddhists and Hindus, they had this stuff all figured out 5,000 years ago. We're just catching on now. And the idea of consciousness. So if it's all consciousness, it's all within your consciousness. And when you die, your consciousness moves. All the world's a stage. All the men and women are but actors. And everybody thinks because I played King Henry VIII in high school, I'm King Henry VIII. No, you're not. You played King Henry VIII on stage. When you leave, you float off and you leave, exit stage left, the I, or people will complain. Oh, I'm complaining about this, I'm complaining about that. And then you ask them, you say, okay, so who's complaining? Is it your higher self or is it your ego that's complaining? And it's always going to be the ego. The higher self is just watching the vision. Mark is doing this, Mark is doing that. Oh, this is interesting. And people will say, I want the world to be perfect. I don't want death. I don't want all this kind of stuff. Even though in the human body, I always point out, inside the human body, 330 billion cells die every single day. How many people on this call actually have a compassion meditation every day to thank 330 billion cells for dying inside our body every day and allowing new cells to come in? We don't, oh, who cares about, an owl is eating 12 12 mice a day. Who cares about the mice? Who cares about this? The only thing we're worried about, we're not worried about the 330 billion cells. It's when the ego cell is dying. And that's like, hey, phone 911, I'm going to die. It's like, holy cow. It's the ego cell that cries out. And that's the one that complains. The higher self is just going, hey, it's a ride. They're going up and down. This is pretty interesting. People will say, I want a good life. And I always point out to people, if people say, I'm going to get off the karmic wheel, I'm not coming back. And I go, come on, you're sure you're coming back? What? How long can you sit on the beach in Hawaii and drink Mai Tais? It's like God watching a movie in the movie theater. And Mark says to his wife, I love you. And she says, I love you. And then he says to his son, I love you. And I love the grandkids. And the grandkids say, hey, Mark, I love you. And it's, I love you. I love you. And after 5 minutes, God says, I don't know. I'm out of here, man. Get out of here. I don't want to watch this for the rest of eternity. They want the ups and downs. And we don't realize that that's part that we learn from this, that life is, as much as we hate it, is death and birth and death and birth. We have every year more stuff dies than there are than the like in terms of insects and stuff. 100% of everything dies every year. The human being is the only one. If you start taking a look at even beetles is 25% of the mass of the earth is beetles, and they only live about 3 months. So in 3 months, 1/4 of the mass of the earth has died. Everything's dying. And we don't really care about all the stuff that's dying around us. We just care about the ego self. Holy cow. And that's what you got to realize is the ego self will leave the body, and that will be the recycling. If they said to me, if it's one life, that's one world. But if it's multiple lives, everything changes. So if it's multiple lives, you're probably coming in here to plan something, to do something, and you're planning your death. And people say, no, I don't want to, I don't want to die or whatever. This is bad, what's happening here. And you start looking at, maybe it's not bad. Maybe that's how it works. It's life and death and life and death. And that you plan this time I would like to die in a plane crash. I've done the killing. I would like to, and you plan your own death, and you plan what you're going to do during the world. And that's what it comes to what Jim Semivan said. So Jim Semivan says about the abduction. So when I do the evil alien thing, I'm going to get into the abduction thing. He says, it's not right. I mean, it's violated my personal thing. My wife was injured, and I'm not cool with this thing and stuff like that. And I point out the fact that if Jim Semivan had not been abducted, there would be no disclosure. He's the guy that was behind disclosure. Would he have gone to the government and said, hey, we're dropping this thing, if he had not been abducted? So if you look at his life, he probably said, I'd like to be abducted because I want to get this thing out. The idea of Dolores Cannon talks about the three waves that come to the earth to bring disclosure, to raise consciousness to the fact that we are not human beings. We are consciousness. And there's three waves to move this along that Jim Semivan agreed to be abducted because he would not be doing disclosure if he'd not been abducted. And that goes for everybody. The people who are doing the disclosure are the people who have been abducted. So you can say, well, okay, it's bad. It's like life and death. I mean, we don't really want to die, but we're going to die numerous times, and it's going to happen over and over again. And everything around us is dying, and there's 1 million dogs. Man's best friend are euthanized every year, and we don't really worry about that. It's like, the smart dog, we might worry a little bit. All we're really worried about is this ego that gets carried away. And that's the separation we have to make, is to realize that we have taken this position. We have come on the stage, and we've come here to do something. And all we got to do is figure out, we came into the world probably to do something. And when we leave, they ask you one question. Newton says they only ask you one question: how'd it work out? Tell me about your life. How'd it work out? Did you get done what you wanted to do? And everybody says the same thing. Oh, I could have done better. So that's the whole idea. We got to figure out, what are we here for? And are we doing it? The rest, it doesn't matter what the Illuminati is doing. It doesn't matter what Donald Trump is doing, or Biden, or it doesn't matter what anybody's doing. All it matters is, why did I come into the world, and what am I supposed to be doing? And when you get that straight, then you really don't care. It's like, I'm doing my thing, and you feel right at the end of the day. You can sleep because you actually you think you're doing something. Because the worst, when I was very young in the 1970s, I'd done a paper on death and dying, and I went and I talked to the chaplains. So it was the same thing. I would go to the experiencers. Who cares what the doctors say and the nurses, because they don't want to talk about it and all this kind of stuff. But you go to the chaplains. The chaplains are the guys that go there when the person's dying or whatever. And there's no more BS anymore. Nobody's playing games or whatever, and the person's dying. And they always said the same thing. The people that were the most uncomfortable at death were the people who had not solved life problems, especially family problems. They would have this thing: my son, I should have told my son. I wanted to always tell him, I need you to get my son. He lives on the other side of the thing. Get my son. I want to say, I'm sorry. And they will wait, the person will stay alive for 2 days, the son will come, the person will say, I'm sorry, and he's dead in an hour. You hear these stories. The unlived life is what people regret. Oh, I was going to do this, I should have done that, I should have done this. So if you go to bed and you say, I actually lived my life, I did what I think I should be doing, you live a happy life. And that's what it's about. And it's about trying to make the world a better place than it was when you left. So if everybody comes in and builds the world as a better place, almost like a beehive. People hate this. Tom Blanc says, it's like a beehive society. Well, yeah, it is like a beehive society. Who wins the Super Bowl? Who wins the Stanley Cup? It's the team that does what they're supposed to do, because you have spotters up above that say, hey, the middle linebacker isn't watching 20 yards open. It's down the field. He's not watching 20 yards down the field. Throw the ball there. End of the game, Super Bowl, they win the Super Bowl. Everybody has to do exactly what they're told. You can't go in the huddle and say, hey, you want me to block? Are you kidding? I'm not blocking. I'm going for a pass. Somebody else can block. I'm not going to get injured. And everybody does exactly what they're supposed to do. So we come into the world, we do the best we can, and we leave the world as a better place. And that's how the universe gets bigger and bigger. Now,
Okay.
I'll leave that, and I want to do one more story. And then maybe
we are ready for a break, or did you want to do one more story?
I'll just do the Uri Geller story before I forget, because it's a short story. I wrote the book called Apports and Manifestations, which is a book that has just come out, and it's about stuff that appears, disappears, moves around. It happens with a lot of experiencers. It happens with physical mediums. It happens with ghost cases. It's sometimes called poltergeist. They play games. They make stuff disappear and take your keys and then make it reappear later. The same thing they did with my PowerPoint presentation. Just totally mess it up to say, hey, watch this. This is pretty cool. And then you're all like, wow, it's just to drag you down the rabbit hole. So anyway, I wrote the book called Apports and Manifestations. One of the stories I told was the story of Uri Geller and John Lennon from the Beatles. And it's a very disputed story. People will say, that, they don't believe it or whatever. So Uri Geller tells a story that John Lennon had a sighting. People will know he had a sighting in August of 1974. But Uri Geller tells a story that he used to have coffee with John Lennon across the street a coffee place across from the a complex where John Lennon lived. And at one point, John gave him what looked like a bronze egg. We've actually got a photograph of it in the book that Sid Goldberg from Gaia TV did an interview for Uri Geller for his museum, and he shows this egg. So it looks like a bronze egg, and John gave it to Uri Geller, and he said, this may be my ticket to another planet, but I don't want it. You can have it. I don't want this. And what he told the story that he had been in the apartment. He'd woke up in the middle of the night, and some of these things ring true. For example, he said, I woke up in the middle of the night and Yoko Ono was sleeping beside me, and I could see there was light under the door coming into the condo. And he said, I thought there must be a fire in the hall. And so he tried to wake up Yoko Ono, and he couldn't wake her up. Now, you'll hear this in experiencer stories all the time, where the one person, the experience is happening, and they try to wake up the other person, and they can't wake him up. Or the dog, they're trying to get the dog to wake up, and the dog's just dead, lying on the floor. And so he tells that. So that indicates that the story is probably true. So he tells the story. He says he tries, and then he goes to the door, and he opens the door, and he said these bug people are standing there. And they're looking at him, and then he's going to try to attack them, and they freeze him. And he said the next thing he knows, he's on top of the bed in the morning. Yoko Ono's awake, and he's got this egg thing in his hand, and that's why he gives it to Uri Geller. And he said, "This may be my ticket to another planet. You can have it. I don't want it." So we put that story in there, and I tell an early story about apports and manifestations. For example, you'll hear about all people talking about the metals, all these metals that people are analyzing. Well, one of the pieces of metal that how it started. So Hal Puthoff is part of this, analyzing this metal. But in the 1970s, they were doing the remote viewing program. And at that point, Uri Geller had been brought in to be tested by the CIA. And at one point, they're taking him out for lunch, and he bites down on this ice cream. He's at this restaurant, and he cuts his lip, and he pulls this thing out of his mouth. And he's sitting with Hal Puthoff, and he's sitting with Edgar Mitchell, Apollo 14 astronaut. And he pulls it out of his mouth, and Edgar Mitchell says, "Where'd you get that from?" "That's my pin. I lost that. It was an Air Force pin or an Apollo pin or something. I lost that in Houston 2 years ago. How did you get that thing in your mouth? So he gives it to him. So you say, okay, you're playing a trick or whatever. So they go back to the lab, and in the afternoon, Hal Puthoff and Edgar Mitchell are in one room, Uri Geller's in another room, and all of a sudden there's dink behind them, and they look behind them, and the back half of the pin is on the floor. And then another pin fell at the same time when Uri was in another room. So the whole thing was, when the metal started, metal started with, these pieces of metal, and they're falling off of crafts, and the crafts wobbling, and all this metal's falling down, and people are gathering this metal. And as Tim Taylor, Mark's friend, called it the gifting field, that they're dropping this stuff. They're gifting this stuff to us. They're dropping this stuff. It's not happening. They're not crashing. They're gifting all this stuff. And anyway, so all these people are doing this. I actually wrote to Hal Puthoff and said, Hal, come on. They don't come across the galaxy in flying saucers. And as soon as they get here, little pieces start falling off the UFOs. Come on. This is the ports. They're dropping this stuff on purpose. They're trying to get you to go, whoa, what's going on here? And he said, and then he's always very short. He said, we'll analyze the metal one step at a time. So he didn't deny that it was a port material. But anyway, so this thing with the ports. So Sid Goldberg from Gaia TV, and this is how the story ends. So people will have this dispute about Uri Geller, and this, whether this is true. I asked Uri Geller about the egg. He said, I never had it analyzed because I was always afraid it might have been made in Taiwan. And so he said he's had it on his person his whole time. He keeps it in his pocket. He's never left it. He's one of the most important things he's ever had. Now it's in his museum in Tel Aviv. There's a Uri Geller museum, and the egg is in there. So Sid Goldberg says, well, I'm interviewing Uri Geller. What do you want me to ask him? I said, well, ask him about the egg. Ask him, get him to show you the egg, get a photo of the egg, because I've got a very good photo of it, and ask him about John Lennon, what John Lennon said. He told basically the same story. And so Sid sends me a photo of this egg. He's holding the egg like this, and you can see the egg is sitting there, and he's looking at me like, hey, I got the photo of the egg. So I write him back. I said, good boy, Sid. Maybe your ticket to another planet. And so the email goes back to him. And at the time he goes back to him, they're sitting in a restaurant in Tel Aviv. Sid Goldberg from Gaia TV and Uri Geller, they're sitting there, and he's telling about the egg, and then he says, oh, Grant asked, and Grant Cameron's this guy from Canada, and he does research and all this kind of stuff. And he said, as he's talking about me, he says, all of a sudden my email comes in. He goes, hey, that's pretty cool. Look, I just got an email from him. He opens the email, and it says, good boy, Sid. Maybe your ticket to another planet for this egg sitting there. Maybe you see your ticket to another planet. And then Yuri's going like this. And he's going, what do you mean? What do you mean? What do you mean? He said, listen. And in the restaurant, they were playing Imagine by John Lennon. So I said, Yuri may have made up the story about the egg, but he sure didn't make up the story about the music. Sid was just blown away. I said, I could not believe that. As my email is being read, they're playing Imagine on the radio. So I'll leave it at that. We'll have a 5-minute break, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, thanks, Grant. I mean, this is like the most fun interview I've ever done in my entire lifetime. But I got to tell you, there's so much here. We'll take the 5 minutes. We'll come back. There's a couple of issues I want to just bring up with you sure. That we'll get into in 5 minutes. But okay. That's just great. Let's stop the recording right now, and then we'll come back to it.
Thank you. Okay, we're back with Grant Cameron and Mark Olson with Laura and Betty and myself and everybody else that came to join us tonight. Like I said, good afternoon, good morning, depending on where you are throughout the earth. We have a worldwide group. So Grant and Mark, it's up to you now. Thank you.
Yeah, Grant, there was, I'm not sure if you heard some of the stuff I was talking about while we're off for the 5 minutes. There's a couple of issues that you got onto, and this idea of spirituality or connection. Two things. You sent me a video last week from Chris Bledsoe's daughter, who was being interviewed by her son, which had an effect on my life. You don't usually send videos to me saying must watch. Well, usually when you do, I drop everything and start watching it. And then I shared it with everybody in our committee. I started sending it to other people. It is such an important thought process. So you and I were lucky enough one time to go to New Jersey and then into Mark Leone's cottage with Chris Bledsoe, and we had a lot of interesting discussions with Chris at that time, along with a couple other people that were there with us. The idea of Chris's idea of the shining lady in the valley, so ETs. So could we? That's one thing. I'm going to try and let you run. And the second part, the next part of what I'd like to sort of bring forward was one of our guests that we've had twice now, Garnet Scholheiser, was a lawyer in Calgary that was, very much the construct. I got 8 emails when I get back. I got to get back at it. Goes up for lunch, and a homeless man that smells like a dead fish, as he describes it, stops him and says, "Do you want to know all the secrets to the universe?" Which ended up being his spirit guide, his spiritual being that actually looks after him, looks over him, and his name is Albert. And it is such a trip to go on. One of the things, so I bought all of, and I haven't been reading a lot of books. I got probably 500 over there ready for my retirement if that ever happens to read. He talks about in one of his books the idea of him going. Albert takes him to different places in the universe. He took him to the afterlife one time, and he met Jesus Christ on a bench talking to Adolf Hitler, which in my mind put me in a different train of thought, thinking, why would Jesus, because it was my point of view, why would Jesus Christ be on a bench talking to Adolf Hitler? And then when you hear the story of oneness and all this connection, it really comes together, and all these things. I didn't want to stop you in your flow.
Yeah.
But if you could sort of just start a little bit with Chris Bledsoe and the idea of what happened to him, taking him into the valley with the ETs, and they back off. Can you go through that, and then we can maybe just carry on from there, because there's some connection to spirituality there that is pretty important, I think.
Yeah, that's where you gets into the idea of, did we plan this? Because I met Chris in 2012, but I really wasn't that interested in his story. Everybody else seemed to know his story. I was with his wife the whole time, the whole weekend, and she was talking about the daughter, and look at my daughter, and she's singing and dancing, showing me these videos and stuff like that. Because she said, well, this is Chris's story. I'm not really interested in that. He's, but he was the guy that all the government people started to get a hold of him. And that was what I always said, that doesn't matter whether you believe or disbelieve, but listen carefully to people like that, because you're going to pick up little clues as to what's going on. Like Chris even said to the one guy at one point, this is just recently, he said to the guy, he said, so what are you guys all doing on my property? Like, what's the deal? All you government guys, you keep showing up here and stuff like that. And the government guy says to him, this is Chris's version. Chris says, he said to Chris, well, Chris, it appears that you have a contact with them and they like you. And so it appears that they don't have any contact with us. It appears they don't like us. So we've come to find out what they're telling you. And that's the whole idea, was when you see Chris's story and you realize that this guy is he couldn't lie to save his life. I mean, he's just telling the story, but it's colored the way that he sees it. And that's one of the things that I say when you get into this consciousness thing. So Chris's story is very sort of biblical, and it has these aspects of Messiah and the good versus the evil and all this kind of stuff. And that's the story so he's building this huge story. It's like you and I got to visit, to interact with, like, sort of a big time Jesus of this time period, that he's going to be this major figure. His book's coming out, and they're doing a TV series on his family and stuff like that, where more and more you're going to go back to his story. But his story is very sort of biblical, the same as if you look at Mission Rama. So people will talk about, for example, they'll talk about grace, and I'll say, well, grace didn't appear until 1961. And I'll absolutely maintain that if you look at every single gray photo that people are drawing, that people make of grace, they're all different. And that's what we sort of forget, that everything is unique in the universe. So if you take a tree, has 200,000 leaves on it, every single leaf on the tree is different. There are no two leaves the same. And then it's this idea, there's no two people are the same. Even twins have different fingerprints and stuff like that. So you start to see that this is the pattern. So grays didn't appear until 1961. And I actually maintain the first one was Nancy Tremaine, and have actually put her files. She actually was a single mother who actually lost all her kids. She wasn't allowed to talk to the grandkids, and she puts out this story. And I remember talking to her when she said the Greys were on board the ship in 1961, 2 months before Betty and Barney Hill. And I said, the Greys? So I thought you said he was a reptilian. And she said, oh yeah, he was a reptilian. And she talks about the baby, and the baby reptilian comes to her house and scratches her chest and all this kind of stuff. The part of her story, it's just absolutely unique, and the footprints across the yard and stuff like that. And then I said, yeah, but you met Mr. on the ship. So what was he then? And she said, oh, he was a human being. He was a real sort of good looking guy. He had dark hair, and he was sitting at a panel. I said, okay, so there's a panel. And then I said, and you've seen him recently, you had in contacts. Oh no, I don't see him as a human being anymore. I see him as an energy being, which is exactly what happened to Chris Bledsoe. Chris Bledsoe, his first encounter was with these 7-foot bluish green beings that he said, if you looked at them in a different light, they looked like they were brown. It depended how much light was on them, what color they were. But when he was called in 2012, the experience you're talking about, he in 2012, he's sleeping. And what had happened is the story where he had the experience in 2007. Then he tells the story to Discovery TV, and they just destroy him on Discovery TV. And he's living in a Bible Belt, and nobody will talk to him. He said even the people working for him wouldn't talk to him anymore. And he had 500 people working for him. He said nobody would talk to him, and because it was like he was dealing with the devil. He got thrown out of the church and this sort of stuff. So he said, okay, that's it. I'm never talking about this again. So from 2008 till 2012, he never talked about it again. So then you see the experience comes in, and it says to him, he says he wakes up. He's lying in bed, he's sleeping, and he hears this word, arise. And he goes, oh, jumps out of bed. And he's standing there, and the beings are in hoods. The same as Tim Taylor. I don't know if Tim Taylor told you the story about when he had that invention that he sold for $100 million on NASDAQ. That invention, he said, the last thing you remember the night before was a hooded figure standing at the end of the bed. And you start seeing these things with the people with the hooded figure that are the wise beings that come in. And I said to Tim, I said, could you see his face? And he said, no, I couldn't see his face. But Chris said he could see the face, and it was like it was an energy being. So it had moved from this bluish green being to this energy being, but his experience had sort of changed. It become more spiritual. So he'd gone from human type beings to this spiritual beings. And what you'll see is that the people who are seeing these energy beings, the number one being that people see is not Greys or reptilians or mantids, or it's energy beings. And these are sort of like the highest form. They don't have any sort of form. And one experiencer from Israel, I don't know if you've interviewed Yossi Ronan, you got to interview him. He had the experience where he saw the green beings. They looked gray, except they were green. And they said, when we come into your world, we take on a body. We have to be in your world, but we don't need a body. We can come in as whatever we want. And you can do the same thing. You just don't know it. And so Chris saw these beings, and that's when they take him to the lady. And what he's told he's going to write in the book is Tim Taylor and all these people said the lady is extremely important. She's extremely important, that all the government people are very interested in this lady, and that other people have had experiences, and that this is sort of a top figure that people are sort of interacting with, whatever it is. Whether Chris believes it's the Holy Ghost, you have God, Jesus, and the Trinity. The Holy Ghost is this lady. That's his interpretation. So what you'll see is the interpretation. Whatever your interpretation is, how you build a story. So Chris builds this sort of religious story. If you take a look at most people are seeing Greys in fear. If you're fearful, you're going to, according to John Mack, you may see Greys. If you're very high energy, sexually minded, like especially with women, you're going to see reptilians. If you're and then if you're sort of very spiritual, you may see these energy beings. And John Mack at one point during sort of an interaction with Bud Hopkins. And if you remember, Bud Hopkins was the guy who wrote the book Intruders. And he said, I don't really think that they're really here to harm us, but I don't like their bedside manner. He said, I think they're just intruders. They should just leave and go back where they came from. There's people who are been totally distressed by this and all this sort of stuff. And during this debate there, and it wasn't a debate, but they're having this conversation. That's when John Mack, who was the head of psychiatry at the hospital at Harvard, said, Bud, it's really strange, I'm the psychiatrist here. You think I'd be getting the real bad ones. He said, but I'm getting the spiritual seeking ones. and you're getting all the bad ones. And maybe that has more to do with you and I. And that's the whole thing. Are you making the story based upon what you're putting out? And if you look at Bud Hopkins' experience, most people don't know that Bud Hopkins was involved in War of the Worlds. 1939, Bud is 7 years old. He's in New Jersey. And if you remember the War of the Worlds story, it was the aliens have come from Mars and they're invading. And Bud Hopkins is in his bedroom. And the next door neighbor comes with his guns. And he said, come on, let's go. We're going to the top of the hill. The aliens are coming and we're going to fight them off. We're going to take a stand. They're not taking over. And his parents were crying, and this guy was all upset. And Bud was looking out the window, almost like looking for Santa Claus. He's looking out the window to see if these aliens are coming yet. That's how it started for Bud. So it was this fear thing. It started with the War of the Worlds, and his father said, "No, I'm not gonna go up on the hill." And he said, "Come on, get your guns. We're going up on the hill. We're gonna take these aliens on. They're not gonna. We're gonna shoot them. They're not taking over." And the other guy went and they stood on top of this hill, and the parents didn't go. That's how it started for Bud. And then he saw the experience in 1963, and that's when I always say to people, if you think this is a random experience that you just happen to be in this thing, listen to Bud Hopkins' experience in 1964, I think it was. He's sitting there, he's driving down the road with these European or English people with him, and all of a sudden there's this flying saucer sitting right above the car in the middle of the day. It's just sitting there. And he's looking at this thing, and he's driving, and he said, "See that?" And they go, yeah, I see it. And they're looking at this thing, and they're driving along. And then Bud's going, what the heck's going on here? And it sort of disappears. And then the next day, Bud goes back. He drives the distance. He's trying to figure out how long was this? How long was it? And he's just down the rabbit hole. And then in 1975, he gets his first case. So he used to drink a lot of scotch. So they have the corner liquor marts. So he goes to the guy that sells the liquor on the corner, and he knows the guy for years or whatever. And the guy says, "Hey, Bud," he said, "I had a weird story last night. Had a really weird experience last night." He said, "I was driving down the road, and all of a sudden, if you remember Close Encounters, the light that comes behind the car," and he says, "Oh, it's just a car. Pass, come on, pass me." And all of a sudden, the lights go up. This is the story. This is where it comes from. The lights go up like this over the guy's car, and it goes, and it goes over into this yard and lands, and this guy that sells Bud the liquor sort of stops, and he looks, and he says, a bunch of aliens, 12 aliens came out with shovels and started digging holes. And I'm going, come on already. This is like, and Bud goes back the next day. He says, "They're digging holes with shovels?" And he said, "Yeah, they're digging holes with shovels. Like the aliens came all the way here to dig holes with shovels." And they had these bags, and they were putting this stuff in the bags. And then they went back in the ship and they took off. And so Bud goes, "Really?" So he goes there and he finds the 12 holes. He goes, "This is for real. The guy actually did see this thing." And then he goes to there was a big apartment block, and he goes to the guy who was the security guard at night, and he said, "Did you see anything on that night?" And the guy said, yeah, there was something out in the field that's light." And Bud, that's it. Suddenly he's doing UFOs, and he's down the rabbit hole, and you can see how he gets dragged in. And the story, you think it's a random story, and you realize, no, it's like a play. It's like all the world's a stage. All the men and women are but actors, and they have their entrances, exits, all that kind of stuff. So Bud gets into this whole thing, and then you see Mission Rama. So people will say, okay, there's Greys, and the Greys are doing it. I have a list of all the sightings between 1947, and they wrote a book about it. 1947. It's just the cases. 1947 and 1961 when the Greys appeared. And I say the Greys appeared in 1961. They weren't before 1961. I don't care what anybody says. They've twisted it and said, "Oh, there's Greys at Roswell and all this sort of stuff." But if you go back and you see 1947 and 1961, all these cases, number one, every single case is different. There's no two aliens that are the same. And the other thing that you see is there's no Greys, there's no reptilians, there's no mantids. And what you see guys with bubble helmets. And the one even had the hose coming out of the helmet going down into a sort of a tank on his back, like an oxygen tank. And they were little tiny beings, or they were human type beings in suits. And they would ask them where they're from, and they're from Mars. Even like the 1895, when we discovered the canals on Mars. That's when we discovered the canals on Mars. Then suddenly all these airships came across the United States, 10,000, United States and Europe, and they would land, and the guys had beards, and they looked like ordinary people, and they were hanging off ropes, and the ships had propellers on them, and they were made out of wood and stuff like that. And they said, "Where are you from?" And they said, "Oh, from Mars." So you see that people don't realize this. If you've been in it long enough, you realize it's a pattern. It's morphing. Even like Bud Hopkins or Bob Bigelow said at Skinwalker Ranch. It's morphs. It keeps changing. It never does the same thing twice. You set up a camera and then it goes something off camera. It does something off camera. It just keeps going and it changes. So you have the airships become Foo Fighters, and then they become green fireballs in the late 40s. Then they become Adamski type crafts, and you got all these guys with suits and long hair. And then they become the grays, and then the reptilians appear in 1980. There are no reptilians before 1980. They appear in 1980, and you see this thing is morphing. And now we've got the orbs. We didn't have the orbs. We didn't have light language. I maintain there's no way we had light language. Now you got all these people doing this light language stuff, and the phenomena is almost changing as we go along. And if you take a look at the other pattern is, people will say, okay, but the grays are the predominant race or whatever. So I interviewed a guy from Sweden, and he said there are no abductions in Sweden, none. And this is one of the guys that runs this big, huge organization that investigates this stuff for like 50 years. He said there are none. This is an American type phenomena. And the other thing is, if you look at Mission Rama, where I wrote 2 books on Mission Rama, my experiences with Mission Rama, where they said, oh, Antarel knows you're coming to the mountain. And I go, it does? And it's like this alien, they're dealing with this alien, and he's got long hair, almost like the 1950s. He's muscular, looks like they described him as looking like Phelps, the swimmer. He's all muscular and wearing this tight suit and stuff like that. And he's got these boots. And there's the woman commander of the ship, Vika, who's beside him. And I get a message from him and from Vika, and they say you're coming to the mountain, and they say 9:33 on August the 18th, 2017, there's going to be a program sighting. And at 9:33 above my head, this thing started flashing. I went, holy cow. And so I was buying it. These guys are the real deal. And they would open what we call portals, but they called Zendras. And they would take 7 people. In fact, one of the guys that flew the craft was a 747 United Airlines pilot who had been inside the Zendra, told me the story about the Zendra, and then told me about flying the craft twice. He got 2 experiences of flying the craft. And all the beings were the same. They were these beings with the long hair, like beautiful beings with, and they were like living under the mountain, and they were the White Brotherhood. And you start to see all these stuff, like you could see the religious and the beliefs coming into who it was, and they were manifesting these beings. So there's beings, but as Ronan said, when we come into your world, we can take on whatever body we want. And we have a part in, we're sort of manifesting what we're seeing. And people don't realize that. They think we're objects of the universe. It's a random world, and whatever happens to us, it's happening randomly, and we become the victims. So it's the government, it's the Illuminati, it's my mother-in-law, it's the dog, it's what, all these sort of things that are picking on us. And that's, if you get away from the victim thing, if you realize, even if it's not right, if you actually sort of say, I created this, even if you don't know for sure, you will live a better life because you will take responsibility for it is. Why would I put this stone in my path? Why would I have this deal go bad? Why would I have this happen? There must be a reason why this happened. I did this for a particular reason. Why did this happen? And instead of believing it's random, but people want to believe it's random. It's almost like because we've turned it into like a hockey game. So there's the good guys and the bad guys, and we're always the good guys. And then there's the bad guys. So that whatever team we're playing, we pick off, well, this guy's a dirty guy. I mean, he's a real dirty guy. And then when we're not winning, or when the game's going on, it's, hey, the ref's always on their side. The ref's always calling. And it's always that deal. And it's this good versus the bad. We're the victims. And we would have sure won this game. I mean, they stole it from us and all this kind of stuff. And that's what you're doing is once you take responsibility for the fact that I may be manifesting, or as Seth, the great channeler, the big channeler that started the New Age movement said, you manifest what happens around you. There is no other rule. And that's something that's going to, I think, is going to have to be changed, that people are going to have to realize that we are influencing what we're seeing. I remember the one that was weird was there's a big controversy now about the blue avians. So everybody said, what do you think about the blue avians? Like, I never watched it. I really not interested in that sort of stuff. It was sort of questionable. I remember I went one time to an event where there's 600 people in the room, and I was like, how is this so popular? 600 people in the room. There's 100 people had been sold tickets that couldn't get in the room. They're paying $75 a ticket. They're all mad. I want my money back. What's going on here? And I'm going like, what is this thing about the blue avians and stuff like that? And then I went and I lectured in Sweden and the country. Anyway, I was lecturing in Europe, and there's a woman there who was channeling, was doing stuff like that. And so I said, oh, okay, I'll pay for a session. So I did the session, and then she says, oh, I'm dealing with two beings. One is Martin Luther's wife. And I go, Martin Luther's wife? And I'm going like, is this a coincidence? Like, I'm a Lutheran. So why would you be channeling Martin Luther's wife? Of course, I'm immediately interested. Martin Luther's wife? Are you sure that's Martin Luther's wife? Why would she be channeling to you? And then the other one was the Blue Avians. And I go, you channeling the Blue Avians? He said, yeah. And I'm going like, I thought this was all BS. And the thing was, it may have been created. So it's same as Mark, you can build a world, you can build a building in the physical universe. You can build a building in the spiritual world. You can build things that actually take place and other people pick. So there's so many people talking about the Blue Avians that they actually create in the spirit world, the Blue Avians that some woman in Europe picks up on and starts channeling them. And the example of that happened in Canada. It's called the Philip experiment. It happened in the 1970s in I don't know if you heard about the story, in Toronto. So what they did is they made up a ghost and they gave the guy, his name was Philip. He lived in the 16th century and he was fooling around on his wife. He had a mistress and he kept her in a part of the property where his wife never went. And so then his wife discovered that he had this mistress and she accused the woman of being she confronted him. So what he did is he accused the woman of being a witch and they put her on trial and they executed her. It is all made up. They executed her, and then he felt so bad about it. They went up into the castle, and he jumped out a window and committed suicide. So they make up this story, and then they're sitting there meditating for a whole year, and they're trying. And they got the table tapping, and they're trying to get this being to come through, and they can't get it to come through with meditating or whatever. And so someone says to them, "Why don't you do like they do in mediumship? Why don't you sing 99 bottles of beer on the wall?" And that's what you do in mediumship. Is people are singing. They're singing all these songs, and what you do is you get the vibration going, almost like Mission Rama. They do this oming and meditation for days, and you're oming and you're doing all this sort of stuff. You're trying to raise the vibration, and the beings lower their vibration, and you meet them in between. So that's what they do in these seances. Is they sing, and everybody gets the vibration going. And so they said, why instead of meditating for a year and let's do the joyous thing. So they started singing. First night, boom, they're talking Philip, and they're talking to this Philip guy. He didn't even exist, and they're asking him all these questions. And Philip liked to sing with them, so they would sing these songs, and Philip liked certain songs, he didn't like certain songs. And this whole thing, they wrote a whole book about it. They did a documentary on this Philip experiment where they actually made this ghost appear, and they actually have things that when the person that was missing, so somebody didn't come to the seance. The song that person liked, Philip didn't know that song that night. He didn't know he didn't know the song. They would try to sing it, and Philip didn't know the song because the person whose song it was missing. And that's the thing is you actually created a ghost in that world, and people were picking up on it. So that's the idea that it's all consciousness. There is no physical world. It's all made out of consciousness. When you break it all down, you break it down into atoms, and then it becomes particles, and then it becomes energy patterns, and then it becomes the quantum wave and stuff like that. And that's what what's her name wrote a book, Kay Randall May, who's if you haven't seen my session I did with her, I placed it on. Okay, so she's actually written a book on quantum physics. She talks about how the universe begins. She channeled that whole thing. So that's the whole thing, is this that we are part of what we're doing, and we don't want to believe that. And it's very hard to believe that it may all be inside yourself. There may be John Wheeler, who was the successor to Einstein at Princeton, described, there is no out there. It's a participatory universe. And most people don't realize that the early quantum physics guys, like Max Planck, who's the father of quantum physics, said, nothing gets behind consciousness. Consciousness is primary. And they all believed that. And then what happened was the quantum physics equations were so good, they were using them to create electronics and all this kind of stuff. The whole modern world is based on quantum physics, on electronics and stuff like that. And what happened was the name's escaping me. There was a statement that came out, shut up and calculate. And everybody denies they said it. And shut up and calculate. Don't think about the philosophical implications of this. The fact that the wave doesn't break down until someone observes it or tries to measure it. The consciousness is creating the wave to break down, and the material to forget about that. Just do calculations and build cell phones, and don't worry about the rest of it. And now it's sort of turned around that when I started consciousness in 2012, a lot of people sort of cut me off. They still have cut me off because they thought, oh, Grant's lost his mind or whatever. And now consciousness, everybody's talking, even people in the UFO field are talking about consciousness, even though they really don't understand what they're talking about because they know it's a buzzword now. Everybody's talking about consciousness. And even in the physics, apparently the number one problem that a lot of physicists are trying to figure out is consciousness, but they're still going back to the idea that the brain creates consciousness. Now the brain's involved, but it's correlation. It's correlated, but it's not causation. It's involved. The same as a TV. The TV's involved, but it doesn't mean that there's a football game inside the TV. Yeah, there's a thing going on, and we want to block out in the physical world, the scientific world. We want to block out the fact that there's a signal coming into the TV, and that's what's happening. Is we're the puppet on the stage, and we've got this puppet going, and the actual eye is running the puppet. The eye is there, the one that disappears and comes back when Betty Andreasen is sitting on the side of the bed, or Chris Bledsoe when they're taken into the spirit world. So he's taken to the spirit world. He's taken out into outer space, and she's sitting on the side of a mountain. Well, this is like crazy. She's in outer space sitting on the side of a mountain, and she says to him this idea, Chris, you have a burden and it is yours to carry. And that's what I said to him. I said, so what's the burden? Do you know what it is? He said, yeah, I know what it is. It's the message. And it's the message of this idea of oneness. It's all spiritual. The world has to change. It's in a bad state and this sort of stuff. We have to raise the consciousness. And this is all coming out in his books and stuff like that. And then he still doesn't believe it. He still doesn't follow it. And then he's taken a second time. He's taken a second time in late 2012. And no, the second time is when he's taken to outer space. The first time he's run over by this bull. So it's 1,500-pound bull. He sees it coming, and it's like a bull, but it's not material. It runs him over, and then as he's getting up, she's levitated in the air. He said she's the most beautiful lady he's ever seen, and she's talking to him, and now he claims that he talks to her all the time. And the importance of what you're talking about is now his daughter, who is again, when you get to the spiritual stuff, what you see is we're very left brain. We're very male. Pissing contests, war, sports, me versus you, all this sort of stuff. And the female is the one that says, let's have a family, let's get together, let's, this sort of stuff, be one, be the family. Whereas the man, the career is number one and stuff like that. So it's the right brain is the one that's tapped into the universe. And what we do in Contact Modalities, the book I wrote, is what you're trying to do is you're trying to get rid of the left brain. You're trying to silence the noise that's blocking the signal. And there was a prime example that was shown recently is an analogy. Is if you want to know, there's the wisest guy in the room the wisest guy in the room in a cocktail party is on the far side of the room. So how you're trying to listen to what he's saying, but you can't because all these people are on noise. How do you find out what that wisest guy in the room is saying? You get everybody to leave the room and you can hear him very clearly. It's the noise in between the signal. And that's what's happening, is that there's a signal and a noise. So what you're doing is you cut that left brain, the male brain, the one that wants to talk, and it says, this is all garbage. The ego's on the left side. So when suddenly the ego realizes it's going to die, it's going, get me, save me, save me. And I'm going to save. And the I is saying, you're just a puppet, forget about it. You go through death like everybody else. And so once the left brain is out of the way, if you can do it through meditation, through hypnosis, through channeling, through whatever process you quiet that noise. And what you're doing is you're quieting the left brain. You're not quieting the mind. People say quieting the mind, you're quieting the left brain. And then suddenly you can hear the signal. And that's the important thing about Chris Bledsoe and people like that, is they've got the signal. And that's why you got to listen to the experiencers. They're getting the signal, and you got to get the signal and find out what are these people saying. And then you start seeing these patterns. You start seeing these bizarre patterns of people saying, I can see in 360 degrees. And you're going, that doesn't make any sense. Why would someone say that? Because it's true. They actually, and it's like, and then you get into people who are, if you've seen the blindfold people that do the blindfold seeing, they can put the thing behind the person can sit on it, they can put it above their head. And it's the whole idea. They're seeing in 360 degrees. It doesn't matter where you put the target. They've got the blindfold on. They can see exactly what color it is or read a book or whatever. And we're starting to learn this. And I think we've gotten to that point where people are starting to realize more and more that this stuff may be true, that consciousness may play an important role. And so Chris brings this message, and then I go in there, and he claims that's when he was able to heal, is when I went there. And the story of the dog, I don't know if I want to tell the story of the dog, where the dog starts bleeding and everybody says, that's horrible. I even put it on Twitter, and they pulled it off Twitter because it was like offensive. It was like, but it had the picture of the dog. that was bleeding. And you think like, why would God do this? Why would God make the dog bleed? And what happened was, I was there and the dog was, I didn't want to believe that they were letting the dog out of the house the first time I was there. And the dog kept coming, the dogs kept coming in the house. And I went, you're leaving the door open, Chris. It happened 3 times. I go, you're leaving the door. And then it's almost like the phenomena said, you're not impressed with that? Watch this. And this dog's bleeding all over me and the blood's going up the wall. And you go like, why would God do this? This is horrible. It's like death. It's like, this doesn't make any sense. It's evil. It's whatever. And even Chris said the shadow people, he thought it cut the dog. And I said, why would the shadow people cut the dog? And he said, well, they're evil. And I said, well, how do you know they're evil? And he said, well, because they're dark. I said, what's because they're dark doesn't mean they're evil. And so we had this thing. I said, you know what happened, Chris? The reason they cut the dog is because you're doing a movie. They want this story out. They want this bizarre. They don't want you. I love you. I love you. I love you. I love you. They want something up a roller coaster and up and down and stuff like this. They want Chris he's got this disease and he's going to die and he's got an out of body experience and the dog is bleeding and they want, you're sitting on the edge of your seat and what's going to happen next? And so the dog's bleeding all over me. And then Chris puts his hand on the dog with the rag and the rag's all full of blood or whatever. And he takes his hand off. And the dog gets up and goes running off like nothing had happened. And I chase the dog and the dog barks at the front door once and goes taking off in the next yard. And then I said, you know why, Chris, you know why they cut the dog? Is because I didn't believe that they were letting the dogs in the house. And they wanted a spectacular thing for the movie. And that's why they cut the dog. They wanted this thing in the movie. And he said, no, I don't think that's true. And then 2 weeks later, he contacts me, he says, have you still got those photos of the dog? Because I photographed this whole thing, the dog and the bleeding and stuff like that. You say, you still got those photographs? I said, yeah. And he said, Warner Brothers would like to see them. And he said to me, and I didn't learn this till this year, he said it was at that point that he could heal. That was the first healing he did, and he could heal people. And I remember, I don't know, you weren't at the conference in Maine. He was at Maine. There was this woman, there's these 2 twins, they're in their 70s, and one had had a stroke and she was deaf, and they'd gone to Chris to get healed. And then Chris says to me, he says, he was standing there, and the woman says, my sister's deaf, she can't hear. Can you do something? And he said, at that time, the cell phone goes, and it's Tim Taylor. And Tim Taylor says, if you're ever out in front of a hotel and someone wants a healing, go ahead and do it. So he puts his hands around her ears. He said, in the name of Jesus, I command that you hear. And she goes into my lecture. She comes out of the lecture. I didn't see this. She comes out of the lecture. I could hear everything Grant said. I could hear everything. I've been healed. And this whole thing was going on. The thing. And so Chris did this healing. And as you've seen the pictures of the tree, the burning tree. Why would they burn a tree? It's this dramatic story. His story is like unbelievably dramatic and ups and downs. And it's like they wanted to make a 5-year series out of this thing. That's that many stories in this thing. It's just, and nothing's like, I love you. I love you. It's like, why would they do this to me? And you see, like, he was ostracized and people threw him out of the church and stuff. That's the kind of movie they want. Can he overcome this? He's out of the church and then he rises up and he becomes, sort of a person with a message for the world and stuff like that. But he has all these downs that when you heard her talk about, she said, oh, it was terrible about how we were treated and stuff like that. And then you go back to the thing. So who is offended? Is it the ego or is it the higher self? And it's so everybody drops back into that ego. Oh, terrible. I mean, why is this happening and stuff like that? But she tells the story of going to the Monroe Institute, which is the institute that taught the CIA remote viewing. A lot of it came from the Monroe Institute. It was Monroe that taught the CIA guys how to do it. And so you see this other thing where it's this bad sort of, everybody says the bad institute that's doing this thing for the remote viewing. And then they go there and they've learned through Scientology and all this kind of stuff how the mind works, and they go there and they play these tones where they put one tone in one ear and one tone in the other, and the brain is trying to synchronize these things, and boom, suddenly you're out of your body. And because she's sensitive, because she's right brain, she's met all right brain, like musicians. I did the music book, and all these musicians that have download songs and are experiencers and stuff. Why? Because they're right brain. All musicians are right brain. They can't read and write music. Read and write music is left brain. They're right brain. They're very sort of that thing. They're picking up the signal. They don't really care. So she's right brain. She's music. She's got her master's degree in music at NYU, and she wants to be on Broadway and stuff like that. And so she's out of her body. I would go there. You would go there. We'd go, and sit and listen to the noise, and nothing would happen. And she's out of her body, and she meets the lady. And I was just floored when I heard that she actually, and she said, I can remember she said, I was so I was so overwhelmed. I couldn't ask any questions. She didn't ask the lady any questions, but she was encountering. So that's going to be part of the story. You see that they're adding these parts of the story. And I actually asked Chris, I said, Chris, because I know he's being bugged by different people for interviews and stuff. I said, can I interview your daughter? I just thought that was the most amazing story that I wanted to get people like you and people, all these people around that listen to me to hear that story. It's so powerful, that story of this girl that has this experience at the Monroe Institute and where she goes and how she's out of her body and she's going and she's going back to the circle and other people aren't there and she meets her younger self and the same thing. The younger self is all oppressed and she comes to grips. She holds your younger self and becomes part of her. And that's what happens in psychedelics. What happens in psychedelics is that all it does is it raises your emotions to very high levels. And all these things from your past come up. And instead of you dealing with it and putting it away, you're forced to deal with it because it's this very high energy. And it's like talking to a psychiatrist. You go through the emotion, you cry. And that's what she did. You take it into your body and boom, you're cured. And so she tells this story, just fascinating story, but a fascinating family. And one of the big messages I think that's coming out is his book and his story. And I'm honored, and I think you are the same thing, to have met him. That's why I say this is the Super Bowl of all stories. I mean, you got to meet Chris Bledsoe and to talk to him, to know him. You got to know Tim Taylor. I mean, Tim Taylor, when people know who Tim Taylor was and what he did and the inventions he did and all this kind of stuff, he's going to be like this historic person. You and I knew them. We were in this game, almost like when you curled, you were at the top curlers and stuff like that. It's that thing where the life was exciting and it was like, you got to do this, you got to do that, but you learn the lessons. And what we have to realize is that the bad things are where we actually learn things from. When things fail, as long as things are going well, we say, oh, the ego takes control and says, man, we got this all under control, man. It's just, everything's just going great. But it's when the ego gets slapped and you go down and then you say, well, if you are responsible, instead of blaming the world or what's around you, you say, why would this happen to me? What can I learn from this experience and learn? And then that's when you grow. And that's how I think, that's why I say, when I look at, if I were to die tomorrow, I think I sort of understand what's going on, that it's this spiritual process. It's all this consciousness process. And all these other things are just like us believing the world was flat in 1492 or the sun goes around the earth. We just don't know yet. We're gradually, as we go along, we learn more and more. And that's our job, is to raise this next level, to bring this new information in that people will use, and it moves us to another level. And our kids will come in, like even our kids will say, we're oppressed, because people don't believe us and they sort of laugh at us. But if you talk to a kid, you say, are there aliens? Well, of course there's aliens, you idiot. I mean, is the world like a video game? And they'll go, well, of course it's like a video game. They know, they're not going to deny any of this kind of stuff. It's what Max Planck said. You do not win your debate by convincing the other person you're right. It happens in a series of funerals, and the new generation that comes along is not offended with the idea. That's how it works. The new generation comes in, we'll put in what we can, but the new generation it's like they hate our music. They hate, I tell the story, when your kid is between 1 and 10 years old, you're the hero. At 10 years old, they say, Dad, could you sort of walk 15 feet ahead of me? And when the kid's 15 years old, Dad, could you not be around when my friends are around? It's like the kid is breaking away from the parents. He's got his own music, his own ideas. And that's what's happened. The new ideas come into the new generations. And that's how it works. Life, death, life, death, life, death. And you've got to accept the death, and you got to accept the bad times, that they're as important, maybe even more important than the good times.
Honest to God, Grant, it's such a connection and fantastic to have you on. I mean, there's so many things as I've evolved. I've been lucky enough to sort of have you as a friend, and actually being able to listen to these things as I go along. It shapes my reality as well. I won't say I allow it to happen. I take responsibility for my own soul, my own journey that I'm on. And I think that's one of the big things here. If we realize, and this is the idea of manifestation, that we control our own destiny, all these things that we create and imagine and put together in our reality, as you've said, which makes all kinds of sense to me, is that we take responsibility for our own lives. We help ourselves, we help others. Yeah. And a part of this show that you started in this realm has changed people's lives. We've had the ability to have people that have been suffering with the struggle with this concept. And now you're onto a concept that actually cures the soul to the point where we're now talking about something that is going to change the world again. And Chris Bledsoe is one of the people that is bouncing the drums around to say, hey, we control our own destiny. We can manifest and create our own reality. And that's how the world will get better, not to stay in war or whatever. Stay focused on your own issues, take responsibility for your own self, create your own reality to wherever you want to shape it. If you want to be something, a mountain climber to Mount Everest, fine, great, congratulations, do it. It's such an experience. We're so lucky to be here at this time and to be having the shift that's going on. I think that's part of the thing, Grant, that you're a massive part. You think when you go from a craft in Carmen to the connection of universe, it just is, that's quite a ride.
Yeah.
Congratulations to you, Grant.
I pointed that out, that I never intend to have the experience. And when it comes to consciousness, I make the joke, but it's not actually a joke. I mean, in 2012, I could not have spelled consciousness. I couldn't have cared less. Oneness. I didn't know the concept. I said probably the same as you. The concept of oneness, to actually understand the concept of oneness, that everything is alive, connected, and one. That if you injure somebody else, you're injuring yourself. You're all part of the same system. I mean, I had no concept. Who cares about oneness? Get out of here. Or the idea that love is the basis of the universe, or stuff like that, where these concepts that we've come across that are just, but you fall back into the illusion so easily. Even now, I was making the sort of the analogy where I do a meditation thing, and I recommend it to people. I had, when I was doing the psychedelics, I had 4 sessions where I was actually taken through a compassion meditation. Like, actually, it was unbelievable. I won't get into it. You'd have to read the book. It was like taking all the pain of everybody that was just had lost a loved one at that time. It was like over and over, and it was, and the emotion. And one thing I do every day is I listen to, if you Google search Plum Village Compassion Chant, it's 22 minutes long. I listen to that every day, and that is the closest thing I've seen in the world to the emotions, to the feeling that came during that. And I was taken through this. I didn't do compassion. I didn't know what compassion was. Who cares about compassion? And it happened to me. They did it to me. It was almost like, remember Desta when she was doing the channeling, and she was trying to do the channeling, and this sparkly gray being came and put his hand on her shoulder and said, oh, you want to know how it feels? This is how it feels. It's the same as me. That's how it felt with that Plum Village Compassion Chant. It's just the closest thing. But I went through this whole thing, and yet I still fall back. For example, I always I get into watching, the news and garbage like that, and I go and I watch every day. I look at Russian losses, and the other day, of course, they hit that thing, and they 400 people. They got 400 people at the same time, like a football game. Yeah, they got them, and I'm going, holy shit, I'm falling back into the illusion. It's like when 400 Russians, even if they're whatever, 400 mothers are going to cry. 400 families are going to be destroyed. And that's what you got to realize. Everybody is a soul. We're all in this together. And it's so easy to get into the football game analogy where it's me versus you, or Canada is better than the United States. And if we win at the hockey in Canada, it's easy to cheer and to get into that because it gives you a feeling of rush when you're part of the team. When in fact, what did you have to do with the Bombers winning 2 Super Grey Cups? Absolutely nothing. But it's like, yeah, we won. It's like, no, you're just sitting there watching.
It is. You know what? You talk about influencers in our time. Grant, you are an influencer on our time. You think about the paths that you've been on and how people have followed. That's why we have so many people that wanted to hear and talk to you about this sort of thing. Maybe we should open it up and allow people to say something, because you are an influencer. When you start talking about consciousness and you had the download in Phoenix, think how many people have switched to consciousness as part of that whole train of thought. Yeah. You created a train of thought in a fantastic way. Mitzi, should we, or I'm not sure who's monitoring, looking at, or if we should even have just people come on and ask the question.
The last couple minutes, and we can extend if you want to.
Sure.
If we ask questions, we probably want to turn the video off unless people want to be videoed.
Yeah, it's up to you. And maybe it's up to the people whether they want to.
But you could find people that, and Grant, you noticed that.
Yes, so I see
Yeah.
Brian has raised his hand. So as everyone, if you're interested in asking Grant, and obviously we're not going to be able to stay on here. Our last show, we still talked till 9:45, and the only reason we stopped is that our Zoom ran out. But so if you want to speak, on the bottom you go into, I think, reactions, and there at the bottom of that, you press on that, it says raise your hand. If you want to raise your hand and you want to ask Grant a question, try to make it short, and let's see what Grant can provide you with an answer to your question. Brian, if you want to get started, go ahead.
And I'll try to be short too.
You're muted, Brian.
Yeah, you gotta unmute yourself.
So am I here now?
Yes, you are.
Okay. Yeah, Grant, I last saw you in 2017 here in Richmond near Vancouver, Lalani's house, and excellent talk, fantastic. I'm concerned about, you said you have health issues. I wonder, how can people carry on your legacy, or what would you like your supporters like us to do, and how would you like to be remembered, and what do you feel has been your greatest accomplishments?
Well, what I try to do is I try to be as open as possible. So I'm the type of guy that get into a lot of trouble because I really don't have any secrets. I name names. I figure I always have this expression that's in the Bible: what profiteth the man if he gains the whole world and loses his own soul? So I write books. I have about 12, and I have 3 that just came out, and I have 2 more coming out. And I just try to put down as fast as I can. And luckily, I have an editor, Desta Barnaby, who you would know because she was living in Vancouver for a long time. I have the advantage that I can just write it and never really edit it. She does all the editing, so I can put down stuff very fast. And now, because I lost use of my left hand, I've regained it just in the last 24 hours. But I learned to use audio to text speech, so I can produce stuff very, very fast. And what I try to do is I realized that the experiences I had were very important and very meaningful. And I really don't care what people, because I'm old enough. I'm not in this for money. I'm not in for anything. And I'm old enough where I really don't care what people say. So I just put out what I think is true. And I make sure that my files, because I know my son-in-law now lives in Vancouver near you. And I know that the stuff's going to go in the garbage as fast as you can think. He is not interested in it, as most people, their kids aren't really interested in it. So I make sure that my files survive, and I try to do as many interviews and name names and say what I think is going on. And that's what I try to just put it out. That's what I say to everybody else is people will be, they want to stay in the closet, and we make the joke, closets are for clothes. And people should try to get their story, because what you found with Chris Bledsoe and other experiencers is they'll say, no, I really don't want to talk, whatever. And the minute you get them to talk, it's like, wow, it's like you can't shut them up. We had an experience 2020 where they opened a Zendra in Mount Shasta, and all these Latinos, they levitated 9 people in a circle into the air, and they were in a Zendra because they said they sounded like they're underwater, which is they're inside a portal. And the beings came, and I asked the one guy, once they started talking, they didn't want to talk. And we finally got 3 people to go on the record, and then they went talking. And by the end, they were all fighting to talk. And the one guy said, I said, how many beings were there? He said, there were as many beings as there was trees in the forest. And I couldn't believe it. And this is an experience. 9 people levitated, but they didn't want to talk. And now they've gone into the closet again. But that's the thing, is you get these really, really important stories that might teach people something. The onus is on me, but it's also on everybody else to write it for your kids. Write down what you've got. It doesn't, because now you can publish 1 book at a time. You can publish a book and never put it out, put it on a shelf just for your kids, your story, your journal, because that's the way it works. They publish as people buy them. So you can buy 1 book. It costs you $4. It costs $5 to ship it to you. You put a cover on it, and you have it, and you document it for your kids. Because 500 years from now, as I told Angela Joyner, who now has died, I said, Angela, she lost her job as a reporter and never got another job. And I said, Angela, you may have lost everything you had in this world for defending the UFO people in Stevensville, Texas. When she told the story, I said, but 500 years from now, Angela, your great, 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 great grandchildren will say, Angela Joyner was my relative. I'm so proud that she was there. And so you're recording it for history. You have to realize that we are living at the time that nobody knows. Everybody's living lives of quiet desperation. They have no clue what's going on. You and I have the clue what's going on, and we should record our story.
Fantastic. Everyone caught in drama these days to derive their own reality to something new. But you're staying on their path and having fun and enjoying life is a much better thing to manifest from there. Grant, let me just get on to is it Bear? Because I have I had my cataracts replaced and taken out, so I can't see on my computer. But Barry, you want to take off you have done it. Okay, you're on them.
Yeah,
go ahead.
It is Bear. Thank you. Hi, Grant.
Yeah, Bruce.
I just was wondering about the Doctor Who series and the TARDIS, and that really brought to mind. And that's been going since the 50s, from what I understand. So back in the 50s, somebody had the idea that they were going to make the TARDIS much bigger on the inside than it ever was on the outside.
Yeah.
And that goes along with the same thing that you were talking about, craft and this kind of thing.
Yeah. I think they do leak the stuff. There's a guy by the name of Chase Brandon from 2012. If you Google search Chase Brandon, he talks about that. He was the CIA guy in Hollywood. So the thing would be Bruce. Oh, Bruce, I hear you're making a movie on CIA. Yeah, yeah. You ever been to the CIA, Bruce? No. Let's go to the CIA, Bruce. We'll show you how the thing works. So when you put it in the movie, you'll be inside CIA, you know how it works, and they guide you. So they move you down a road. And he wrote a book on how CIA had handled Roswell, and he made the statement. He said, if you want a good read the book. If you want to learn something, read between the lines.
Yeah, that's good. I don't want to correct you, but that was English, so it would have been way across the water. But one more thing, sorry, Grant. One more thing. If you ever get around to writing fiction, I think it would be I know you're busy enough as it is, but I think it would be a wise decision. Maybe get good old Desta to help you out about consciousness in a material world. I think if you could go along that theme and try to come up with something that's entertaining, but also gives people the idea of what you're talking about tonight. It's one of the things you talked about anyways. I think I'd really buy the book. That's only one, but I think it'd be a good thing for you.
Yeah, I think you're right. That's how that CIA and all these agencies, all of them, the CIA, Air Force, they all go to Hollywood because that's how you get the idea. So if I'm talking to a skeptic, he just backs away. And we have this sort of adversarial thing, and he goes into his corner, I go in my corner. It's like politics; they move farther into the corner. But if you do it through movies, through fiction, people who are skeptics watch it and they don't realize they're being influenced. That they're saying, I don't really believe this thing, and that's what happens. That's why Hollywood is so heavily used by the government into putting ideas into Hollywood, is to get it across, to acclimatize. That's why when in 1975. They leaked so much material in 2017 when the New York Times article came out. I wrote an article called "The 64 Reasons They Decided Not to Tell You the Truth," and one of the reasons was, the stock market's going to melt down. Stephen Greer had that. People are going to commit suicide. All the religious people are going to go crazy, whatever. And what happened when the New York Times did the article? Absolutely nothing. Everybody went, yeah, I knew that already. I mean, go on to the next thing. People had been acclimatized to the fact that this was real. And now we're moving on to the aliens. And then people are going to say, yeah, I know there's aliens. Okay, now tell me the next story. And that's what's happening, is people are being acclimatized, and it's being done by the powers that are influencing, trying to get the story. So you release the story in bits and pieces so people don't get caught in 1947 with their idea of UFOs. They want to bring you up to speed, but they fictionalize everything. So you can't prove anything. You can't prove it's real. You can't prove it's not real. You put the story out there.
But
it's a good idea.
The idea is there, you're saying. Yeah. I guess that's the way to go. It's probably less personal, but not coming from the horse's mouth almost makes it more believable.
Yeah, I agree. That's how it's done. Even Close Encounters of the Third Kind. I remember one woman from Psychology Today interviewed Steven Spielberg's mother. No, it was E.T. There's a movie E.T. We interviewed Steven Spielberg's mother, and she said, I've even got it on tape. She said, I went to her and she said, you know that story of E.T. hiding in the closet with all the animals, the stuffed animals? Said it actually happened to Stephen. And the woman said, it did? She said, Stephen told me it did. I believe it. So that's the whole thing. You start looking at these things and you start to realize this story's true, this story's true, this story's true. And they just fictionalize it so nobody can really tell where it came from.
Thank you, Grant. I'll get off
Thank
now,
you.
but I wanted to show you my
There you go.
Isn't that nice?
There you go.
That's off the stove. It was just sitting there, so I thought I'd wear it for you.
That's a good idea.
Thanks so much, man. Bye.
Grant, just to be respectful of the time, because you've put in more than a couple hours here so far. Are you willing to take a couple of questions, or where are you at?
No, whatever you want to do. I want to ask you a question.
Go ahead.
When did you get your cataracts done?
I got them done on December the 9th, 2nd and 9th. So both of them got taken.
Oh, okay. I was going to say, if you heard I got the cataracts done. I went out the night that my cataracts were done, and I saw the aura around lights. It was the most beautiful thing I've ever seen in my life. If I had known, they said I could have this one set of lenses, but you might see auras. I said, I don't want to see auras. I could not believe it. It was the most beautiful thing I've ever seen in my life. It was alive. It was color. It was like unbelievable. And it only lasted one day.
Life-changing.
Life-changing. Absolutely.
Life-changing. When I see the edge of trees and see the contours of things that were blurs before to me, because I'd been on the watch for 15 years for cataract removal.
Yeah.
But anyways, that's just another thing. So Sabrina, you're next. If you want to take your name off or off mute there, okay, go ahead.
Okay. Hi, Grant. My
Yes.
question is, you mentioned the light languages.
Yep.
And I was wondering, what exactly are they if ETs speak telepathically?
We did a show on it. I think what Mark was co-hosted a show with. I really don't know what they're doing. I mean, it's almost like the same thing as speaking in tongues with the charismatic, where you're getting energy. And they claim that anybody can do it. You can just start talking like that, and it will build that you can do it. So it's again, it comes down to this whole thing. Is there really ETs, or is it all just higher vibrating beings who are pretending to be ETs, or what's happening? Because light language didn't happen. It just came along, and it's a vibrational language. So everybody will tell you the same thing. The language has vibration in it that will affect you. It's not so much the words, even if you don't understand what it is. And we had the one woman, I tried to get her to come public. She was in Georgia, who was just standing in front of the camera, and she would do these things. And she put about 15 videos on the internet, and she just will not come forward. I figured out who she was, and she had these orbs flying around her as she was doing it. And she would do automatic writing. If you ever seen automatic writing, and she would write like 100 miles an hour, and she just talking while her hand is moving. And again, it's all these curious things, but you start finding patterns when you go into it. And that's what we got to do, is we got to get it out there so people understand. And I actually wanted light language tested. There was a group at the Thomas Jefferson University where what they do is they put people in MRI machines. So they want to see what part of the brain lights up when people are praying, when they're meditating, when they're doing automatic writing, when they're doing mediumship. All these kind of things. And I went to them and I said, I'd love to see light language. And what they found was, whatever it is, because people say, they're just making it up. People are channeling, they're just making it up. But what they found when they did the MRI is that the people who were praying all got the same brain pattern. The people who were doing mediumship all got the same brain pattern. It was a different brain pattern, but it showed this very distinct brain pattern, which showed whatever the people are doing, they're not making it up. So I said, can you do light language? And the guy said, oh, absolutely. We'd love to do light language. I sent him some of the videos of this woman doing light language and automatic writing and stuff like that. He said, I'd love to do it. It'll cost you $50,000 and plus travel expenses. And I went, 50,000 American, that's like 100,000 Canadian. I don't think so. So it's on, but the Jefferson University will do it. If you can find people that will put up the money, they're willing to do it. And that's where we're going now, is we're starting to look at that. We're starting to look at praying and meditating and all this kind of stuff in MRI machines where people are starting to examine it. And the more we examine it, the more we're going to get to the point of what's going on. And I'll give you one example and go to the next question. But when I started looking at channeling, people say, oh, people are just channeling. I can absolutely guarantee you when someone channels, I can tell. You can channel for 5 minutes or 10 minutes and I can reproduce it and I will tell you whether the person is making it up or channeling, because everybody who channels has one very distinct characteristic, and that is they never go if you translate this video, you will see that you and I and everybody else will hesitate, will go, well, and all this sort of stuff. A channeler will never do that. It's completely clear of any of those type of things. In fact, the one that I like to watch is Paul Selleck. He's done 10 books of channeling. They've only changed 2 words in every single manuscript. Otherwise, it's pure. When you try to translate a YouTube video, just go on a YouTube video and look at the translation of it, and you'll see how many times people break and say and oh, I believe. Never happens in channeling. And you start seeing these patterns when you start looking, but you got to look at all these bizarre paranormal phenomena. It's like if these paranormal phenomena were fake, or if the universe was the way we think it is, these paranormal phenomena would not be happening. They're happening because there's something inside the physical universe that we have got wrong. And you've got to look at the phenomena with an open mind. And the more you look at it, the more you'll see there are actual patterns, like with orbs, or everything. Orbs are just dust. I'll say to people, orbs, you got orbs? And then I'll say, have you got any colored orbs? Oh yeah, I got colored orbs. Have you got any orbs? Have you got any mist photographs where there's a mist before it was the orbs? Oh yeah, I got those. You want to see those mist photographs? Now say, if you got any with beams in them, where there's beams coming out of the sky and not touching the ground? Oh yeah, I got those. You want to see those? And you start seeing these patterns and you realize there's patterns to this. This is actually happening. And it's up to us to examine it as hard as we can, and as long as we can. And it may take 10, 20, 50 years, but all the paranormal phenomena are going to turn out to be true. Everybody was telling the truth, exactly like UFOs. All the mediums and all this stuff, you're going to find out that the vast majority of the stuff is exactly the way people described it. They were telling the truth.
Thank you,
You have the
Grant.
most
Yeah,
fascinating.
that
Sorry,
that
go ahead.
yeah, that was really good. Thanks for your answer.
Thank you.
So keep it short, people, and let's be respectful of Grant's time. So far I see on there, it's called iPhone 3 is next. So if you can unmute yourself, make your question short and concise, and we'll get onto it. So because there are other people that want to get on as well.
Okay, I'm very grateful. I'm grateful to be able to speak to you directly, Grant Cameron, because you're a very well-known UFO investigator, and I know you've dealt with a lot of different cases and people and stuff, and all of your dealing with all these different experiencers and abductions. Have you ever run across anybody that's had like atypical dermatitis on their face, and also a pressure sensation on their nose, like on the bridge of their nose? And also injuries when they wake up in the morning and they claim that they're going up and fighting it when they're asleep, but they don't remember.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's very common, especially we did a book, Nicole Sackage and I did a book on triangles, where we actually show triangles on people's arms. There's actually maybe one person who's watching here from Winnipeg who actually had the triangle on the arm. Why would, whatever this intelligence is, why would it put triangles on people's arms? And I have a thing called the theory of wow, where I say that a lot of what they're doing is they just want you to go, wow, what the hell is going on? Something is going on. We've got to figure this thing out. And the material world is not the way we think it is. There's something, I know this sounds crazy, but this is actually happening to me. And with the injuries, with all this kind of stuff, we know that through hypnosis, people can make burn marks appear on their arms and stuff like that. So we have this situation where I think a lot of it is just the idea where the theory of wow, where they want you to go, wow, especially the triangles. Why would they put triangles on your arm? Or you see people have UFO sightings and the UFOs are flying along and then they make a triangle. Why would you make a triangle? What is that, a pre-abduction maneuver? Or the Nimitz situation? You have the Nimitz where it drops from 80,000 feet down to sea level in 7/8 of a second. What are they doing there? Like, what's that all about? Is that a pre-abduction maneuver? What is that? That's just showing off. It's going, watch this. It's absolutely impossible. They just go, oh, watch, or they did to my PowerPoint presentation. That's what I think a lot of this stuff is with the experiencer thing, is they're putting these marks on people. They're doing all this kind of stuff, or they may actually be doing experiments. So we say, okay, they seeded the earth. That's great and fantastic. And then suddenly we get this idea that they may be seeding another planet using us, and we may have agreed to soul contract, and people get very upset about it, that I made a soul contract to come in and experience this kind of stuff. One thing I do know, that when people have had more than one regression session, or they've started to look very heavily at their experience and deal with other people, that they go from fear and victimhood to Messiah very quickly, and they suddenly think that they're here, and you can't shut them up, and they want to tell their story, and they don't care who wants to hear their story. It moves very quickly. That people will start as victims, but the more you go along, and there's even an experiment. I think you guys were going to have Ray Hernandez on. Ray Hernandez did 3,000 experiencers. They questioned them, and what they found was, yes, these people had these various type of scoop marks and triangles on their bodies, and things that you're describing, these very sort of weird things. That'd be very weird things like you're describing, where it's not until you've examined like 30 cases, suddenly you get somebody who's got exactly the same thing, and then you realize they're doing this. But Ray Hernandez, one question was, if you could stop what was going on to you through all your experiences, would you stop it? 84% of all the people questioned said no, keep it going. So the thing is to get more and more to examine your case, to look at it and compare it. So I can compare it. I'm not sure exactly I've got, but through a lot of searches, I'm sure I could find other cases that are exactly the same as yours. And I think a lot of it has to do with maybe an encounter you had, but a lot of it has to do with, they just want you to be puzzled, to be mesmerized, to wonder what's going on, because it's not until you start to go for help that you actually start to tell your story. As long as you've got it figured out, you're never going to tell your story. What they're trying to do is they're trying to get people to go out and tell the story. They want you to tell this bizarre story, because everybody's going to go, that's a bizarre story. And then another story. And it's the idea that people started to get indoctrinated, that something's going on. What the heck's going on? What are all these weird stories? And people start exploring it. That's what they want. But until people come out, until people go into public and start telling these stories, nothing's going to happen. It's the stories that get people like me starting to investigate. Like, what do you mean you flew the craft? Like, you nuts? That was my first impression. Like, I was going to throw her out of the house. I couldn't believe it. She would make up such a stupid story. And that's the thing is, and then I started to see another story. And now we realize this idea of consciousness, that's how you move the craft around. That's how you go from here to there. People will say, you put your hand on the panel, you think where you want to go, and you are instantaneously there. Or
okay, can I interrupt you for a second?
Yeah.
I do fly the ships.
Oh, there you go.
I'm an experiencer and have been since I was 7 years old. I remember my past lives, and we have a different spirituality than the humans do. And the consciousness where you create it all in your mind and everything, and there's no external enemies, is a farce, because I remember my past lives fighting the enemies on the other planets. And they did exactly verbatim, exactly the same exact criminal activities against those other races on those other planets that they're now doing to this planet Earth right now, with the adrenochrome, the chemtrails, the giant computer in Utah, and all that stuff. They're doing the same thing now.
Okay, I would ask you two things. Have you written your story down, number one, to record it for future generations?
Yeah,
and the other thing is, it really doesn't matter what they're doing to us. It's not what cards are dealt to you. It's how you play the cards. So what difference does it make who's doing what to who? If multiple lives are true, then you agreed to come and be in the middle of this mess. Whatever mess you find yourself in, you agreed to it. You came in here, and people don't want to believe the soul contract thing. They want to believe they're a victim.
Yes, we were drafted to come here to end all of this parasitic activity plaguing the lesser evolved beings in this universe. And the second thing is, yes, I do fly the ships. And it's not just mind control, it's also automatic nervous system control. And I don't
Yeah.
know about the others who claim to fly the ships, but I get automatic finger movements and very specific patterns,
Yeah.
and automatic hand and arm movements when I'm laying in bed, whether I'm awake or asleep, and it's without any muscle flexion whatsoever. And I'm wondering how many of these people that claim they fly the ships have the same symptoms happen to them.
Well, we don't know until everybody comes public. Everybody has, that's why I'm saying it has to be public, where I don't know you've flown the ship. If I had done it, I would have compared it. That's why I said, if I had known all these other things, I maintain that whatever this phenomena is, it is a lot less physical than people think it is. It's way more spiritual than people think it is. And it's at least 1,000 times more complex than people think it is. I agree that you're bringing another level to it. Now, I can go back and ask these people, but that's the thing is I didn't know about the 360 degrees. I didn't know about these finger movements. I've heard that finger movement thing before. So that's the whole deal, is that when you put it public, then people like me can start examining it and comparing it to other cases. But I didn't know about your case. So that's why I encourage people to write it down and at least bring it to people like me who can compare it to other stories, so that we can find these patterns. There are definite patterns, and I agree that yours may be more complex. You may be more advanced than other people who have flown the ship, but we need to have that material to be analyzed.
And also there's the different types of navigational patterns too. That's
Yeah.
why you got to see the different types of craft. And and contrary to what James Hansen says on UFO Witness, there is no fixed one race flies one type of craft. There's various different races on any given craft at any given time.
Yeah. It's, as I said, it's 1,000 times more complex. It's like Niels Bohr, no, David Bohm said, when we figure out the quantum physics thing, we get it all figured out, there's just another level below that. I would say the same thing with the UFOs. Once we figure out the flying of the craft, there's just another level of complexity above that. It just gets more and more complex. And that's how the world gets built. We add to it, we imagine it, and we even the idea of how to fly a craft, if we imagine this, then we can create these things that actually become reality in the spirit world. It's all consciousness. There is no physical world. It's all consciousness. So
Grant
Chris?
and Susan is the one that's talking to you, and Susan has agreed to talk to our group next month, which is Valentine's Day. So I want to acknowledge that.
Okay.
And we're running short of time. So I know, Brian, you want to question, but you've already kind of talked. And Carol, you haven't talked yet, right? So
No, my dear, I haven't. Thank you, Mitzi.
Yeah.
Grant, okay, I've got a question, but I just want to say what a role model. What an inspiration you are. I just want to thank you for everything you've done. And I met you at the Alien Cosmic Expo with Richard Dolan and, Travis Walton, whatever. I came from England, worked in London, and then came here in '68 to Canada. And I hold degrees in counseling, psychology, payroll, and teaching English. I retired in 2015.
Wow.
And in 1950, my unconventional life is 1956, my father had died, and I was playing badminton over the garden wall with my cousin John, and we had a daylight sighting of a UFO. And then after that, things really started weird, unexplained things were happening. So from then onwards, I attended all the UFO conventions, met Betty Hill, Travis and Larry Warren. Then I had the near-death experience, right? And that's where I became consciousness. I was told to go back and give out. Wow. And to raise the level of consciousness in this world. Wow. Traveled to Stonehenge, Chichen Itza, Grand Canyon, Egypt. I'm a member of 8 groups right now, the Billy Meyer, Monroe, the Knowledge Book, and then the Toronto Experiences group, where you told Hildegard to start a Toronto group, and you were going to start the Winnipeg group. Ekankar, Opus, Sheila Steffi's Wish Foundation, and of course, the Winnipeg group here. Listen to radio shows coast to coast. I conduct presentations right now on remote viewing. Transcending levels of consciousness, that's based on Hawkins, Sir Dr. David Hawkins' book, and the UFOs, and also my near-death experience. So,
wow, Yeah, near-death experience, a lot of people don't realize, again, you see the patterns that when you start looking at the details, 37% of all experiencers claim that they've had a near-death experience. Most of them that I've talked to have had two. And so the question is, did you randomly come in to be an abductee, and did you randomly come in to have a near-death experience, or did you come in to do both to learn something? And the question is, you came in to learn something, and you take it. So I applaud you that you're helping raise the consciousness. That's what we are, I think, to do. And we should feel honored to have been involved in this whole thing. I think we all agreed to do this, to come in and to do this kind of stuff. And I applaud you for doing it. And anything I can do to help you, let me know.
Thank you so much, Grant. And where I'm writing a book actually. So where do we send our accounts to you for your?
Well, we can discuss. I can give you the message. We sort of help people publish their book, because Desta Barnaby has shown. I taught her how to do it. Now she teaches other people how to do it. But we can actually show you how to do it and maybe help you at some point. But that's part. Our publishing company is called It's All Connected Publishing. You can see all my books there. And that's the whole idea. It's all connected, one word. And that I didn't realize what that actually meant for years. I wondered why this woman had this weird email address. It's all connected. And suddenly I realized, oh, I know what it is. It's all connected. And that's the oneness concept. Everything's connected. So that It's All Connected is our publishing company. And what our idea is to challenge people to write down the stuff, even for your kids. You don't have to publish it and put it on the internet so everybody knows who you are. You just publish it, put it on and when in your will, you say, oh, by the way, there's a book that tells my story, that you lived this fantastic life, you had these experiences and stuff, and your kids should know about this. I just think that whether they read it or not is up to them, but they should know that we played this game, because I'll guarantee you 500 years from now, 1,000 years from now, everybody in this thing will become famous. It'll be like we lived at the time of Jesus, or we lived at the time of the signing of the Constitution or something like that. And everybody's going to say, oh, those people were so lucky. They actually got to be there when it was actually happening. We got to realize that people are living lives of quiet desperation. We have seen the light, and we have to go there, because we've been given this opportunity, and we probably have it as a mission. We've come in to do this, and we have to do what we can to make the world a better place with the information we have.
Absolutely.
Okay, Carol, you can
Thank you,
also,
Brian.
Thank you.
Carol, you can contact me. I have
Thank you,
Grant.
Mitzi. Thank you, Mitzi.
Okay.
Brian, if you want to carry on.
My question is about how do you feel about full government disclosure? So I've completely changed my views. Now I'm opposed to full disclosure. I support the government. I support basically the military political establishment and going slowly. I'm not sure whether they're aligned with good or bad forces. The whole question of good or bad is uncertain. So I feel it has to go slowly, conservatively, and because the world cannot handle the truth. So I want to ask your view on this.
Oh, I agree at some point. Yes, the people are going to have a hard time. As I said, this is going to turn out to be very, very spiritual. And I think the people that are going to be fighting for the cyanide pills are not going to be the religious people. It's going to be the scientists, because the scientists have, if you paid $50,000 a year to go to MIT, and suddenly someone comes along and says, you know, all that stuff you believed, it's absolute nonsense. And that's the people that are fighting this thing. They're the ones that are holding it back. And the military, I guess, the guys that want to turn it into weapons, because that's how the US works. And they're the chief military people in the world. And it's the idea that they get it first. And they'll always use the example of nylon in World War II. They developed nylon, it was top secret, and then they gave it to us. And GPS, they'll say, do you realize GPS was a military thing, that we had it years before? And then when somebody was going to go public with it, then we decided to make it public, and we released GPS, and everybody got it. And so that's what happens. We use it first, we build weapons from it, and all this kind of stuff, and then we give it to the public. So and they, during World War II, they developed all these things: the atomic bomb, proximity fuse, jet engines, plastic explosives, nylon, synthetic rubber. All this stuff was developed by the military, and that's how the program works. So they're using this model that they're going to use it first, to protect I call it the national insecurity budget. And it's the more insecure you are, the more weapons you have and the more enemies you have. And if you don't have an enemy, you're going to make an enemy, which really upsets me. We didn't talk about orbs tonight. If you read the books, Skinwalkers at the Pentagon, they turned blue orbs into the blue meanies, and they gave this impression that that blue orbs are dangerous, and if you get near, you're going to get a brain tumor and you're going to get cancer and all this kind of stuff. And I go, absolute nonsense. We have an orb group called Orbology, and all these people have taken thousands of photos, and one guy's got 211,000 photos. And this Orbology group, I asked them, hey, has anybody got blue orbs? And did they hurt you? Did they eat you? And it's like everybody said, no, they're actually really good orbs. They got good vibration coming off it. And that's what they do. If you don't have an enemy, create it. So that's what they're doing right now. And that's what Mark and I were part of a thing where there was going to be Canadian disclosure. I'll just quickly tell you the story. We were talking with the top people in the field in the United States who pushed the disclosure thing down there, and they were going to go through Larry Maguire, and Larry Maguire was briefing 10 MPs inside the parliament, and they were all going to come public. And so we went to these guys to do a panel. That you come on this panel, and these MPs are going to ask questions, and then they're all going to come public, and everybody's going to say, holy cow, do you realize all these MPs in the Canadian parliament are into UFOs? And that's what's going to move it. And what the Canadians wanted to do is they wanted the science advisor to the prime minister to get, they're going to provide cover. So this big panel was going to take place with all these MPs, and then this woman was going to say, oh, all these MPs are interested in UFOs. I'd like the prime minister to do a UFO investigation, and it's going to be scientific. When the Americans, to give you a long story short, when the Americans heard that we were going to do, the Canadians insisted they were not going to go down the military route. They were going to do scientific. The one major guy, Chris Mellon, and I will out him for this, Chris Mellon said, that's the poison pill, I'm gone. And the whole thing crashed and burned. They did not come in and they said, you're going to try to sensationalize this thing and turn it into a spectacle. And I said, you're damn right, so I'm going to turn it into a spectacle. What else would I do to it? If you got 10 MPs that are coming forward, sure, we're going to turn it into a spectacle. And they just walked away because we would not go down the threat, the thing that we're victims, and there's all these people out to get us, and the aliens and the Russians and the Germans, and everybody's out to get us and stuff like that. And it's like, no, we want a scientific investigation of this thing. And they would not, they said, we're not here to influence you. They called it the Logan Act. We're not here to tell you what to do. But in the end, they're not going to tell us what to do. But until we did what they told us to do, they were not going to help us. Simple as that. They walked away, and the Canadian disclosure all fell apart. There's 10 MPs that were willing to come forward from 3 different political parties and say, we're interested in this. We would like a scientific investigation done of this. And it was within weeks of happening, and it all crashed and burned.
Grant?
Okay, I think we're just about done. So Grant, is there any last words that you have, wisdom or whatever, before we close out the night?
I always give the same thing that I've mentioned a couple of times, is the fact that whether you believe in reincarnation or multiple lives, just for the sake of tonight, believe there are multiple lives, and that you and I came into this world, and we've come into the world many times, and we probably came in here to do something. And therefore, when we leave, we're only going to get asked one question: how did it work out? And everybody says, I could have done better. Our job is to figure out what we are here to do, and to do as much as we can to make the world a better place, and forget about what everybody else is doing. They will have their own judgment. We are here for a reason, and we got to figure out what it is. And we should do what we can, as I said, to make the world a better place, because that's what evolution is all about. It's the world is getting more magnificent, more smart, more ideas, science fiction ideas that move and become material, and everything you can imagine can become material in future worlds. And that's what it's all about, is figure out what we're here to do, forget about being the victim and blaming everybody else, and sort of moving it outside ourselves. It's about us. It's about us, why we're here. And we should be honored and grateful that we got to play the game, because most people have absolutely no clue as to what's going on. If you were to talk to people around the world and say, what are the 100 most important issues? I will guarantee you UFOs would not come up in 1% of anybody's top 100. People just have no idea what's going on. We do, and it's, the onus is on us, because that's probably what we agreed to come in here and do, is to move this story out, and that's what we should be doing.
I'd like,
Thank you
thank
for-
you.
for coming, Grant. And
Thank you.
Mark is gonna have some final words, and I just want to thank you for giving us your time. And
Anytime.
and if you have some time in the future, come back again.
Yes, I would love to. I'm always willing to share what I'm doing, and because you never know which light will turn on with somebody and they will move and be the key that makes the whole thing move towards where we're going.
I'd like to thank Mitzi, Laura, Betty for being a part of our group that actually runs this thing and helps put it all together. It's a big thing. It would not happen without them. I will also say that I am very thankful that Grant is one of the people that I brought into my reality on this trip back here on this time. And I thank you, Grant, for everything you've done and the path that you're on. It's been so great. And I can't say enough about you. You were wonderful. It's great to have you here, and thank you for coming.
I feel the same way, Mark. Thank you. And together we'll do what we can to change the world. I mean, it's the synchronicities are there, and we've met some wonderful people, and you've done tremendous amount, especially saving the group and keeping it going after. And now you see 1,100, 1,200 people. And if you want, I can put this on my podcast, which will get 2,000 more people that listen to it, and on my YouTube, and more people will listen to it. And you never know who we're going to touch. So namaste to everybody. I honor you, and let's keep going.
You got it. Thank you all for coming. Good night.